Some stories are just stories, and in some are warnings. Tonight's tale was hidden for a reason, but now it's yours. Turn off the lights and listen closely. Have you ever driven for hours on an endless stretch of road, so tired that you weren't sure if your eyes were playing tricks on you? Earl Henderson had been behind the wheel of his 18-wheeler for nearly 14 hours straight. The long haul from Arizona to Oklahoma was a route he had driven dozens of times before. Same barren desert roads, same quiet highways, same empty night sky with its stars stretched wide like spilled salt. But this night was different. His CB radio had gone silent hours ago. The last gas station he passed was boarded up, broken pumps standing like forgotten grave markers. The further he drove, the more his headlights revealed only nothing. No signs of life. Not a single car passed him, not one. That's when he saw it. A glowing neon sign in the distance. Last chance truck stop. Food, gas, motel. Relief washed over him. His fuel gauge was dangerously close to E. His stomach growled. His eyelids drooped. A hot meal and a bed sounded like salvation. The place looked alive. Too alive. Bright neon lights buzzed. A few semi-trucks were parked outside. Music leaked faintly from the diner. Through the dusty windows he saw people. Truckers hunched over coffee mugs, waitresses sliding plates across counters. He parked his rig, stepped out, and instantly felt something was off. The air was colder. The wind had stopped. The highway behind him looked darker than it should. He brushed it off and pushed through the diner's door, greeted by the smell of bacon and stale coffee. "Sit anywhere, hun," a waitress said, not looking at him. He sat. His boots echoed too loudly against the floor. The other truckers in the diner didn't look up, didn't blink, didn't move, like they were frozen in place. Earl's mouth went dry. He waved at the waitress again. That's when he noticed the coffee pot in her hand wasn't pouring. The liquid inside wasn't moving. Neither was the steam from the griddle behind the counter. Everything had stopped mid-motion, like a photograph. And then, all at once, every head in the diner turned toward him. Every single one. The waitress leaned down, her voice low and cold, whispering words that sent a shiver crawling up his spine. "You shouldn't have found this place." The storm seemed to roll in faster than Mike could comprehend. 1 minute the horizon was clear, the next it was swallowed by ink-black clouds. Rain lashed against his windshield, wipers struggling to keep up. The GPS glitched again. The glowing arrow spun in circles, then pointed him toward a stretch of road he swore he had never seen before. It wasn't paved like the rest of the interstate. It was narrower, darker, almost as if it had been carved through the woods by hand. A pit twisted in Mike's stomach. Truckers had an unspoken rule. Never take a road you didn't know, especially in weather like this. But the highway ahead was blocked by flashing hazard lights, and the GPS kept insisting, "Turn right, Highway 19. With no other choice, he eased the rig onto the forgotten road. The trees leaned in close, branches clawing against his trailer like skeletal hands. The storm above seemed muted here, the rain slowing, though the air grew impossibly heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth. Mike's hands tightened on the wheel. Something about this road felt wrong, like it hadn't seen another vehicle in years. His headlights caught faded road signs, riddled with bullet holes, words so rusted they were unreadable. The deeper he drove, the quieter it became, until all he could hear was the low rumble of his engine. That's when he saw her. A figure appeared in the beam of his headlights, standing dead center in the road. A woman. Pale, drenched, with long black hair plastered across her face. Her dress clung to her body, soaked and mud-stained. Mike's heart hammered. He slammed the brakes, tires screeching against the slick asphalt. The truck lurched, stopping just feet from her. For a moment, she didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there, staring at him. Or at least, he thought she was staring. He couldn't see her eyes through the curtain of wet hair. Mike leaned forward, blinking hard. Maybe it was just the storm messing with him, or the fatigue of a long haul. But no, she was real. She was there. He rolled down the window slightly, rain spraying inside. "Hey, you okay out there?" he shouted. The woman didn't answer. She tilted her head slowly, unnaturally, like a broken doll trying to make sense of him. Something about that movement made Mike's skin crawl. He reached for the CB radio, hands shaking, but all he got was static. Then, without warning, the woman's lips parted. She mouthed something, silent, deliberate. 2 words. "Turn back." The lights inside Mike's cab flickered. The engine sputtered once, twice, then roared back to life. His pulse was racing now, sweat cold on his neck despite the storm outside. He blinked, and she was gone, not walking away, not fading into the trees. Just gone. Mike's knuckles turned white around the wheel. Every instinct screamed at him to throw the truck into reverse and get off this cursed road. But when he glanced in the mirrors, the way back was gone too. The road behind him had dissolved into thick, impenetrable fog. He was trapped. He gritted his teeth, shifted gears, and pressed forward. The only way out was through. The road ahead seemed to stretch longer and longer, as if it were pulling him deeper into the woods. He adjusted his rearview mirror again, half hoping, half dreading to see that woman behind him. But what he saw was worse. In the mirror, the road wasn't empty. It was lined with people. Dozens of them, standing silently in the rain, their faces hidden, their clothes tattered, their eyes reflecting the dim red glow of his taillights. And they were all watching him. Have you ever felt like the road itself was alive, breathing, waiting, and watching? Hank was beginning to. The diner had felt too quiet, the waitress too detached, and the man at the end of the counter too knowing. As Hank pulled his rig back onto Route 190, the storm had broken loose in full force. Sheets of rain pounded the windshield like fists, and the wipers barely kept up. The world outside became nothing but shadow, streaks of lightning, and the long scream of asphalt. He pressed the accelerator harder, desperate to put distance between himself and the diner. His CB radio crackled suddenly, though he hadn't touched the dial. "You can't outrun it, Hank." The voice was low, metallic, warped by static. Hank froze. He hadn't broadcasted. Nobody should have known his name. "Who is this?" he shouted, gripping the mic. "Identify yourself." The only answer was the sound of labored breathing, heavy and wet, like someone gasping through a crushed throat. Hank slammed the radio off, but then came the headlights. At first, Hank thought it was just another rig, maybe a local trucker hauling through the storm. The twin beams appeared in his mirrors, far back, then drawing closer. Too fast. Way too fast. Hank kept steady on the gas, but the truck behind him closed the gap like a predator scenting blood. Its headlights flared white-hot in the rain, blinding him. Then, without warning, it disappeared. Gone. Hank's heart hammered in his chest. He hadn't passed an exit. There'd been nowhere for it to go. Yet the mirrors showed only blackness now, just his own headlights carving the storm. He tried to convince himself he was tired, hallucinating. But then, the CB crackled again, even though it was still off. "Mile 247, Hank, that's where it happened." His stomach dropped. The waitress had mentioned the same mile. The dead mile. Hank's hand slicked the wheel with sweat. He remembered trucker lore, ghost stories told at rest stops, about phantom rigs that chased the living until they ran themselves off the road. But this wasn't a story anymore. As if answering his fear, the phantom truck appeared again, this time ahead of him. No taillights, no brake lights, just a hulking shadow in the rain, occupying the center of the road. Hank yanked the wheel, swerving into the other lane. His own horn screamed as his trailer fishtailed, barely missing the phantom rig's bumper. But when he looked again, there was nothing. Only open highway stretching into the storm. Breathing ragged, Hank glanced at the dash clock. Mile 245. 2 miles until 247. The storm seemed to grow thicker, heavier, as if the road itself wanted to keep him there. The rain drummed like war drums. His headlights caught movement on the roadside, shapes standing just beyond the trees, human shapes. Hank squinted. They were lined up in rows, motionless, pale faces reflecting the lightning, watching, waiting. His skin prickled as he passed them. They didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there like mourners at some endless roadside funeral. Finally, the green mile marker appeared through the sheets of water. 2:47. The CB shrieked to life without warning, deafening in the cab. "Do you remember it now, Hank?" the voice rasped. And in that moment, Hank saw something on the road that froze him to the bone. A semi, jackknifed across both lanes. Its cab crushed, windshield shattered, flames licking the wreck. And inside, slumped against the wheel, was a man. Not just any man, it was Hank. The storm swallowed the sound of his scream as the scene flickered in and out of existence like a broken film reel. Then, gone. The road was empty again, the only wreckage the pounding of his heart. But Hank knew. He hadn't imagined it. Something had happened here. Something to him. Hank has just seen his own mangled corpse inside a phantom wreck at mile 247. What really happened here, and why is he being haunted? The silence in the cab felt suffocating, broken only by the steady drone of the engine and the whine of tires on asphalt. Jack's mind raced, replaying what he'd just seen. The man on the road, the impossible fade into nothingness, and then the face in the side mirror, watching him from the sleeper berth like it had been riding with him all along. He dared a glance into the mirror again. Nothing. The berth was empty, shadows draped neatly across the blanket he hadn't touched in hours. His chest heaved as if he'd just run a mile, his hands shaking on the wheel. "You're tired, Jack. Too many hours. That's all this is," he muttered, trying to steady himself. But then, a sound. Not outside, not in his head. From inside the cab, a slow, deliberate breathing. It came from directly behind him, soft but steady, as if someone was seated quietly on the edge of the bed. Jack's throat tightened. His instinct screamed at him to keep driving, to not look back. But human curiosity. It was a curse. He reached up, clicked on the dim amber cab light, and inched his head around. The berth was empty. Perfectly empty. But the blanket, he swore it had shifted, like someone had just lain down and got back up. Suddenly, his CB radio hissed again. "Jack!" The voice was drawn out, low and wrong, like the syllables were melting. "You missed your stop." His hand shot to the radio and yanked the plug free, killing it. The hiss died instantly, replaced once more by silence, and then his phone lit up on the dashboard. Unknown number, a text message. He hesitated, then tapped the screen. "Check your back seat." His heart almost stopped. Back seat? The rig didn't have a back seat. With a trembling hand, Jack angled the phone like a mirror to the dark glass window behind him. For half a second, he thought it was just his reflection. But then the other Jack in the phone's glass smiled, wide, unnatural, too many teeth, while he himself was stone still. Jack slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded across the asphalt, tires screaming. The force threw him forward, nearly slamming his head against the steering wheel. When the 18-wheeler finally lurched to a stop in the middle of the dark two-lane road, his body shook with adrenaline. His headlights lit up the empty stretch ahead. Nothing but trees, black and endless. And then, movement. At the very edge of the headlights, something stepped into view. A man. No, the man. The hitchhiker. He was standing dead center in the road, his face half turned toward Jack's truck. His skin looked even paler now, gray under the harsh beams, and his lips were moving as if whispering something Jack couldn't hear. Jack leaned forward, straining to read his expression. And then the hitchhiker raised his hand, slow, deliberate, and pointed straight at Jack. Jack's blood ran cold. He reached for the ignition, desperate to put the truck back in gear and floor it. But before he could move, his headlights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. Pitch black swallowed him. You think you know the rules of the road, but what if I told you? This highway was never meant for the living. The engine roared as Mark pressed the pedal harder, trying to outrun the impossible. But no matter how fast he drove, the road stretched endlessly ahead. An infinite ribbon of black asphalt lined with dead trees and broken signs pointing nowhere. His hands gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, but the truck almost seemed to steer itself now, like it was on rails. The radio clicked on again, this time a woman's voice. Soft, familiar. Mark, you shouldn't have left me. He froze. His late wife. No, he whispered, shaking his head. No, that's not real. But her voice kept coming, calm yet laced with accusation. You left me in that hospital bed, alone, just like you leave everyone. His chest tightened, tears stinging his eyes. The voice was inside him now, louder than the engine, louder than the storm outside. He slammed the radio off, but the sound didn't stop. The CB crackled again. A man's voice replaced hers. Exit 13, 1 mile ahead. Don't miss it, driver. Mark squinted through the rain-streaked windshield. A crooked green sign flickered into view. Exit 13. Dead End Road. The same words painted in blood on the map. He didn't want to, but his hands moved as if commanded, cranking the wheel toward the ramp. The truck heaved onto the exit, tires screeching as if resisting the turn. The ramp wound downward like a spiral, each curve tighter, each shadow darker. When the truck finally leveled, Mark saw it. A single building stood at the end of the road, a flickering neon sign above it. Last Stop Diner. Every window glowed faintly yellow, but the parking lot was empty. The rain stopped as if the storm had been cut off by invisible hands. The world grew unnaturally silent. Mark parked, trembling, and stepped out. The diner's door creaked open before he touched it, as if expecting him. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and burnt grease, and there they were. Dozens of truckers scattered across the booths, motionless, pale, eyes open, staring, but not blinking. Coffee cups in their hands, food half-eaten on their plates, as if frozen mid-meal. Mark's stomach turned. These were the missing drivers, every single one of them. And then, one of them moved. A man in the far booth turned his head slowly, mechanical, his eyes hollow but locked on Mark. You finally made it, the man said, his voice low and gravelly. We've been waiting for you. Mark stumbled back, but the others began moving too. Their heads turned in unison. Some rose from their seats. Their voices merged into a chilling chorus. Welcome to the last mile, driver. Mark bolted for the door, but it slammed shut on its own. He ran to the counter, searching for another way out, when he noticed the jukebox in the corner flicker to life. It wasn't music. It was a recording of his own voice. This is Mark Holloway, heading east on I-90. If anyone finds this tape, it means I didn't make it. His heart dropped. He'd never recorded anything. The floorboards rattled beneath him. The truckers' bodies twitched, jerking toward him like marionettes. The diner seemed to pulse, the walls breathing in and out. And then, behind the counter, a figure emerged. Tall, thin, wearing a trucker's cap pulled low, face obscured in shadow. But Mark knew, deep in his bones, who it was. It was him. An older version of himself. Same jacket, same scars, same weary eyes. The doppelganger grinned. You've been driving in circles, Mark, the figure said. Every mile you've driven has led you here. The road doesn't end because you don't end. You're already one of us. Mark shook his head violently. No, no, I'm alive. I'm still alive. The older Mark stepped closer, placing a cold, heavy hand on his shoulder. Not anymore. The jukebox clicked off. The lights flickered, and every trucker in the diner whispered the same words together, their voices filling the air like the roar of an engine. The road goes on forever. The last thing Mark saw was his own reflection in the diner window, not moving with him, but smiling back long after he stopped. Mark had never been alive on that road. He was just another lost driver, doomed to repeat his final haul forever on the highway that never ends, the last mile. Would you still check into a motel if you knew it would never be in the same place tomorrow? The storm hit just after midnight. Rain hammered the windshield so hard it sounded like gravel, and the wipers on Daniel's old Ford barely kept up. His girlfriend Sarah leaned forward in the passenger seat, her eyes squinting through the darkness. "There," she said, pointing. "A sign. Motel." The glowing neon flickered in the distance, cutting through the sheets of rain. Vacancy. A lone building sat just off the highway, its parking lot cracked and half flooded. Daniel pulled in with relief. The car sputtered, coughing like it might die any second. "We're lucky," he muttered. "If we hadn't found this place." He didn't finish the sentence. The motel looked old but cared for, the kind of roadside stop you'd expect in the 1970s. A single-story row of rooms stretched out, each with a yellow light glowing above the door. A thin man with hollow eyes sat behind the front desk, staring blankly at a TV playing static. "You folks traveling far?" the man asked without looking up. His voice was flat, like he'd said the same line 1,000 times. "Just passing through," Daniel said, signing the ledger. He noticed the pages were filled with names, some old, some recent, but none had checkout times, only check-ins. The man slid a brass key across the counter. "Room 6. Enjoy your stay." Inside, the room smelled faintly of mildew, but it was warm and dry. A faded painting of a mountain hung crooked above the bed. Sarah tossed her wet jacket on a chair and collapsed onto the mattress. "I don't care if this place is haunted," she said with a tired laugh, "as long as I can sleep." Daniel chuckled, though something about the motel unsettled him. Maybe it was the silence. Outside, the storm still raged, but within these walls, the sound was muffled, as if the building itself swallowed noise. He pulled the curtains closed, glanced once more at the parking lot, then climbed into bed beside her. Sleep came quickly. When Daniel woke, sunlight streamed through the curtains. The storm was gone. He rubbed his eyes, yawned, and nudged Sarah awake. "Come on, let's grab some breakfast and hit the road." They packed up, stepped outside, and froze. The parking lot was there. Their car was there. The motel was there. But everything else was different. The highway was gone. The gas station they'd passed the night before was gone. The trees looked different. Taller, darker, thicker, as if they'd been transported to some dense, unfamiliar forest. "What the hell?" Daniel whispered. He walked a few steps into the clearing beyond the motel lot. There was no sign of the road they had driven in on. Only endless woods, stretching in all directions. Sarah's voice shook. "Daniel, we were near Cedar Falls last night, right? Where are we now?" He didn't answer. Back inside the lobby, the same hollow-eyed clerk sat behind the counter, sipping coffee. Daniel slammed his hands down. "What's going on? This isn't where we stopped last night." The man's expression didn't change. He stirred his coffee lazily. "The motel moves," he said, as if it were the most ordinary fact in the world. "Always has." Sarah laughed nervously. "Moves? Like, what? You mean it's some kind of chain? Different locations?" The man's eyes finally met hers, and for the first time Daniel saw something. Something cold, almost gleeful, flicker in them. "No," the clerk said. "This building, the land beneath it, the air around it, one place at night, another by morning, sometimes the desert, sometimes the mountains, sometimes..." He trailed off, sipping again. Daniel's chest tightened. "That's impossible." The man shrugged. "Doesn't matter if you believe it. You're here now. Breakfast is at 8. Sarah tugged Daniel's arm, whispering harshly, Let's just get in the car and drive. We'll find our way back. They grabbed their bags, hurried outside, and climbed into the Ford. Daniel turned the key. The engine sputtered, roared, then died. He tried again. Nothing. Sarah gripped his hand. It worked fine last night. The motel lights flickered, all in unison, as if in response. Daniel stormed back inside, but the front desk was empty. The clerk was gone. The static-filled TV buzzed louder than before. He slammed the bell on the counter, once, twice, 3 times. No answer. From the hallway behind the desk, a door creaked open. A whisper floated out, low and rasping, though the words were impossible to make out. Daniel stepped closer. "Hello?" The whisper grew louder, more urgent, as if it were calling him specifically. Sarah grabbed his arm, but he shook her off. He pushed the door open and found a narrow corridor lit by flickering bulbs. At the far end stood another door, slightly ajar, with something carved into the wood. Daniel squinted. The carving was a word. His last name. "Daniel!" Sarah's voice trembled. "Why is your name on that door?" The name carved into the door was unmistakable. Miller. Daniel Miller. His stomach twisted. This doesn't make sense." Sarah tugged at his sleeve, her nails digging into his arm. "Daniel, please, we shouldn't be here." But the whispering from behind the door grew louder, curling through the hallway like smoke, pulling him forward. It wasn't just sound. It felt personal, familiar, almost like someone he once knew. Daniel reached for the doorknob. The cold brass made his skin prickle. With a shaky breath, he pushed it open. The room beyond wasn't part of the motel. It looked older, much older, like a cabin that had been abandoned for decades. The air reeked of mold and damp wood. Rotting furniture sagged in corners, and the wallpaper peeled like dead skin. On the far wall, a mirror hung crooked, its glass spiderwebbed with cracks. "Daniel," Sarah whispered, "let's go back, now." But his reflection in the mirror didn't match his movements. He raised his hand. The reflection didn't. It just stood there, smiling faintly. Then it spoke. "You shouldn't have come back." Daniel's chest seized. His reflection's lips moved, but no sound reached his ears. Instead, the words pressed directly into his mind, cold and uninvited. "What is this?" he whispered. The smile widened. Behind him, Sarah gasped. "Daniel, look!" He turned. The doorway they'd entered through was gone. Only a solid wall remained. Panic surged. He pounded the wall with his fists. "Hey! Let us out!" The mirror began to hum, a low vibration that rattled his bones. His reflection tilted its head, then stepped forward. Not out of the mirror, but into the cracks themselves, disappearing piece by piece as if sliding into another world. The whispering filled the room again, louder this time. Dozens of voices, men, women, children. Some screamed, some cried, some begged. Sarah clapped her hands over her ears. "Make it stop!" Daniel stumbled toward the mirror. "What do you want from us?" The cracks widened, and through them, he glimpsed something moving, shapes in the dark. Pale faces pressed against the glass from the other side, eyes hollow, mouths open in silent screams. And then he saw it, his own face among them. "Daniel!" Sarah yanked him back just as the mirror shattered. The glass didn't fall to the floor. Instead, it hung suspended in the air, each shard floating and spinning, reflecting different scenes. Highways, deserts, snowy fields, endless forests. The motel in every possible place. One shard flew straight at him, slicing his arm. Warm blood dripped onto the floor. The humming ceased, and suddenly, the door reappeared. Sarah grabbed his hand, pulling him through the hallway and back into the lobby. The desk was still empty. The static on the TV had grown louder, nearly deafening now, showing nothing but white snow. They collapsed onto the nearest chair, breathing hard. "What the hell was that?" Sarah whispered. Daniel pressed his bleeding arm, his mind reeling. "I don't know. But this place, it's not just moving. It's collecting something." The clerk returned as if nothing had happened, carrying a tray of steaming coffee. "Breakfast is ready," he said, setting it down on the counter. His expression was calm, his tone casual, like two terrified guests hadn't just stumbled out of a nightmare. Daniel stormed up to him. "What the hell is this place? What's behind that hallway? That room?" The man blinked slowly, then smiled. "Rooms are different for everyone. Some people never open theirs. Some do. Some regret it." Sarah's voice shook. "And the mirror? The voices?" The clerk stirred sugar into his cup. "Echoes. Fragments. The motel doesn't like to let go of what it's collected. They tend to linger." Daniel slammed his fist on the desk. "Collected? Collected what?" The man leaned forward, his hollow eyes glinting. "People." Sarah's face went pale. No, we're leaving. Right now." The clerk shrugged. "You're free to try. Everyone is." They bolted for the car again. This time, Daniel pumped the gas pedal, whispering desperate prayers under his breath. The engine roared to life. Relief surged through him. "See? We can get out." The wheels spun violently in mud that hadn't been there before. The more he pressed the pedal, the deeper the tires sank, as if the earth itself was swallowing the car. Sarah screamed, "It's pulling us under!" Daniel shoved the gear into reverse, but the car didn't budge. The motel's neon sign flickered, faster and faster, until it glowed a steady, burning red. And then, silence. The car stopped sinking. The mud was gone. They were parked in a completely different place. The motel was still there, but the forest around them had vanished. Instead, they sat on the edge of a vast desert, the horizon shimmering with heat waves, though it was barely morning. Sarah covered her mouth, trembling. "Oh my God. It's true. The motel moves." A faint knock came at their car window. Daniel jumped. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, stood there in a tattered nightgown, barefoot in the sand. Her hair was tangled, her eyes wide and empty. Sarah lowered her window an inch. "Sweetheart, are you okay? Where are your parents?" The girl didn't blink. She whispered something so softly they almost didn't hear it. "They never leave." The girl's whisper lingered in the air like smoke. "They never leave." Sarah froze, her knuckles white on the window crank. What does that mean? Who never leaves? But the girl didn't answer. She simply turned and walked barefoot across the hot sand, heading straight for the motel. Daniel and Sarah exchanged a terrified glance before scrambling out of the car. "Wait! Come back!" Sarah called after her. The child never looked back. The desert heat hit them instantly, the sun already scorching. Sweat beaded on Daniel's neck as he followed Sarah toward the motel. The little girl pushed open one of the room doors and slipped inside. They hurried after her, but when they flung the door open, the room was empty. Dust floated in the stale air. The bed was neatly made, untouched. Sarah's voice cracked. "She just walked in here. I saw her." Daniel scanned the room. Something caught his eye, a drawing pinned to the wall with a rusted nail. A child's drawing. Crayons on yellowing paper. It showed the motel. Each square door was neatly scribbled in, but in front of one room, a stick figure stood alone. Its head was colored black. Above it, in shaky letters, Room 6. The same room they had stayed in last night. Daniel's pulse quickened. "She's connected to our room." Sarah shivered. "Why? What does she want from us?" Before he could answer, the floor beneath them trembled. A low groan echoed through the walls, like the entire building was shifting in its foundation. Sarah grabbed his arm, her eyes wide. "It's moving again." They stumbled back outside just in time to see the horizon change. The desert rippled like water, blurring, melting, and suddenly it wasn't sand anymore. It was night. Stars burned in a black sky above a vast, snowy plain. The cold hit them like knives. Sarah hugged herself, teeth chattering. This is impossible. Daniel stared at the motel. Its neon sign buzzed faintly, casting the only glow for miles. The clerk said it moves, but he didn't say why. They decided to confront him again. Inside the lobby, the man was waiting, as if he had known they'd return. He sat perfectly still, sipping from his chipped mug. "You've seen the child," he said calmly. Daniel slammed the crumpled drawing onto the counter. "Who is she? What does this mean?" The clerk glanced at the paper, unfazed. "Guests leave things behind. Some leave luggage, some leave themselves. The girl belongs to the motel now, just like others before her." Sarah leaned forward, voice shaking with rage. "Others? How many? How long has this been happening?" The man's lips curved in the faintest smile. "Since the first night it appeared. The motel was never built, you see. It arrived, and it will keep arriving. Different places, different times, always waiting for the next traveler in need of rest." Daniel's skin crawled. "And what happens to those travelers?" The clerk set his mug down and whispered as though sharing a secret. "They stay." Before Daniel could press further, the lights flickered. The static on the TV flared to life, but this time, instead of snow, an image appeared. Daniel's stomach dropped. It was their car, parked outside. And inside, he and Sarah were sitting there, motionless, their faces pale and lifeless. Sarah stumbled back, choking on a scream. That's us!" The screen glitched, the image twisting and warping, before going black again. The clerk rose from his chair. His voice was colder now. "The motel doesn't like when guests resist." They bolted from the lobby, hearts racing. The snowy wind cut at their skin, but they didn't stop until they reached their car again. Daniel fumbled with the keys, but before he could unlock the door, he froze. The girl was back. She stood in front of room 6, her hollow eyes locked on them. Slowly, she raised her hand and pointed, not at them, but at the room's door. Sarah shook her head violently. "No! No way, I'm not going back in there." The girl opened her mouth. This time, her voice was louder, though still soft and broken. "You have to see." Daniel felt the pull again, the same compulsion as before. "Sarah, maybe we should." "Are you insane?" she snapped. "We almost died in that hallway. We saw whatever the hell that was in the mirror." But even as she argued, the doorknob to room 6 turned on its own. Slowly, the door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness inside. Daniel's breath fogged in the icy air. His legs moved on their own, as if something invisible was guiding him. Sarah grabbed his hand desperately. "Please, Daniel, don't." He looked back at her, torn between terror and curiosity. The girl's voice whispered again, floating on the frozen wind. "If you don't, it will never let you go." The door slammed wide open. A rush of air poured out, impossibly warm, carrying the faint smell of gasoline and burning rubber. Daniel's heart skipped a beat, because inside the room wasn't a bed. It was a road, a highway stretching endlessly into blackness, lined with flickering streetlights, and parked in the middle of it was their car. The room yawned wide before them, a black ribbon of asphalt stretching into endless night. The motel door behind Daniel hung impossibly in midair, a frame leading into a highway that could not exist. Sarah shook her head violently, clutching his arm. "Daniel, no, that's not real. It can't be real." But the smell of burning rubber and gasoline was too familiar. It wasn't just a hallucination. It was the exact scent of their Ford after long drives. And there it was, parked dead center in the middle of the empty road, headlights glowing faintly. Daniel's mouth went dry. "That's our car." The little girl still stood outside, her bare feet pressed into the snow, eyes hollow and pleading. "You have to see," she whispered again. Sarah's voice cracked with panic. See what? What's the point of all this? The girl tilted her head. The end. Before Sarah could protest again, Daniel stepped forward. His foot hit asphalt, not carpet. The air shifted around him, warmer, heavier, smelling of dust and engine oil. The sound of cicadas buzzed faintly, though no trees lined the road. Daniel! Sarah screamed, but he held out his hand. Come with me, please! If this is the only way out, we have to try. Trembling, Sarah clutched his hand and stepped through. The motel door slammed shut behind them. The silence of the highway pressed in on them, broken only by the faint hum of their car's headlights. They approached cautiously. Daniel's fingers trembled as he reached for the handle. The driver's side door opened smoothly. The interior was identical to their car. Same torn upholstery, same crumpled fast food wrappers on the floor. But the dashboard clock wasn't right. It blinked the same time over and over, 3:17 a.m. Sarah gasped. That's the exact time we pulled off the highway last night. Daniel touched the clock, but it didn't change. Stuck. Frozen. He slammed the door shut. This is some kind of trick. Some sick game the motel is playing. A low rumble shook the road. They both spun around. In the distance, a pair of headlights flickered on. Then another and another. Dozens of cars appeared on the horizon, engines growling. The faint buzz of cicadas grew louder, blending with the roar of engines. One by one, the headlights began moving, cars speeding toward them on both sides of the road. Sarah grabbed his hand in terror. Daniel, we need to get out of here! They ran back to where the motel door had been, but it was gone. Only endless asphalt stretched behind them. The first car whizzed past, so close Sarah felt the wind slam into her. She screamed. Daniel yanked her toward the shoulder, but there was no grass, no ditch, just black pavement stretching infinitely wide. They were trapped on an endless road with nowhere to go. The roar grew deafening. The headlights blurred together until it was impossible to tell how many cars there were. And then Daniel saw them, the drivers. Every single one of them looked exactly like him. Dozens, hundreds of Daniels, gripping steering wheels, their faces blank and pale, their eyes black pits. Sarah saw them too. Her scream pierced the roar. Oh my God, Daniel, it's you! They're all you! He stumbled backward, heart hammering in his chest. No, that's not possible. A car screeched to a stop inches from him. The driver leaned out the window. It was him. Same voice, same face. You shouldn't have checked in. The car sped off, vanishing into the blackness. Sarah collapsed to her knees, sobbing. This isn't real. This isn't real. Daniel pulled her up, forcing himself to stay calm. It wants us scared. That's how it controls people. We can't give in. But deep inside, a seed of doubt twisted in his gut. What if these weren't illusions? What if every version of him was a guest who had checked into the motel before and never left? The cars kept coming, endless streams of Daniels, all staring, all hollow. The little girl's voice echoed faintly from nowhere and everywhere at once. They never leave. Suddenly, every car slammed to a stop at the same time. Engines cut. Headlights blinked off. The road plunged into total darkness. Sarah gripped his hand so hard her nails dug into his skin. Daniel, what now? A single pair of headlights clicked back on, illuminating the road ahead. The beam cut across the asphalt, landing on a door standing upright in the middle of the highway. The same door as room 6. The knob turned slowly. The door swung open, revealing not a room this time, but a flickering television screen. Static buzzed faintly. On the screen, Daniel and Sarah, sitting in their motel bed, fast asleep. Sarah's voice cracked. That's us last night. The static twisted, the image warping. Now it showed them outside, running through the snow, staring at the girl. Now it showed them here, on the road, holding hands. Daniel felt bile rise in his throat. It's watching us. The TV cut to black. A line of text appeared in pale green letters. Checkout, 3:17 a.m. Sarah stumbled back, trembling. Checkout? Daniel, what does that mean? Before he could answer, the ground beneath them split with a deafening crack. Asphalt peeled away like paper, revealing nothing but black void underneath. The road crumbled, stretching toward their feet. Sarah screamed as the pavement gave way beneath them. Daniel lunged for the open door with the flickering screen, dragging her with him. They jumped. You know that moment when you realize you've made a mistake too big to undo? That's what I felt as I pushed open the door at the end of the hallway. It didn't creak, didn't groan, didn't even whisper, just swung open silently, like it had been waiting for me. Inside was nothing. I don't mean an empty room, I mean nothing. Blackness so thick it seemed to suck the light from my flashlight. The beam didn't bounce off the walls or the floor. It was like shining a light into a mouth that never ended. Don't step inside, Ellie whispered, clutching my sleeve. Her voice was trembling, but not with fear. It was like she already knew. But I stepped in anyway. The temperature dropped instantly, a wave of cold that made my breath fog in front of me. Behind me, I felt Ellie pulling back, but the room pulled me forward, like the air itself had hands, pushing me deeper into the dark. Then the door slammed shut. Ellie screamed and pounded on the other side, her voice muffled as though miles away. I was trapped, alone. That's when I heard it. Breathing. Slow, deliberate, inside the room with me. Why did you open the door? A voice whispered. It was right in my ear. Hot, moist breath slid across my skin. I spun around, flashlight cutting through the dark, but it caught nothing. And then I realized this wasn't a room. It was a space. A pocket carved out of the house, existing between walls, between time. And whatever lived here had been waiting, starved of attention, for someone foolish enough to enter. The breathing grew louder, ragged, like a dying animal trying to stay alive. My flashlight flickered, stuttered, then died completely, leaving me in smothering darkness. That's when the faces appeared. Not real faces, impressions in the blackness. Pale, distorted outlines, like they were pressed against a thin sheet between me and them. Mouths opened and closed soundlessly, eyes rolled in sockets too wide, too empty. I staggered back, but the floor seemed to dissolve under my feet. The blackness swallowed my steps, and I realized I wasn't standing anymore. I was sinking. Sinking into the house itself. No, you don't get to leave, the whisper hissed. This time it wasn't just in my ear, it was inside my skull. Then something grabbed me. Cold, bony fingers curled around my ankles, pulling me deeper. I kicked, clawed, screamed, but it was like struggling in quicksand. The more I fought, the faster I sank. Through the dark, I caught a glimpse of Ellie's face, tiny, far away, framed in the thin sliver of light around the door. Her mouth moved, screaming my name, and then her hand shot through. Fingers brushed mine. For one impossible second, I thought she might pull me out, but something else caught me first. Hands. Dozens of them. Clawing, tearing, dragging. They pulled me down until Ellie's hand slipped away and her face disappeared behind the slam of the door. I landed hard on cold wood. My flashlight sparked weakly back to life, and I realized I was still inside the house, but not the house as I knew it. The walls around me were swollen, breathing in and out like lungs. Floorboards shifted like muscle under skin. And the shadows, they weren't shadows anymore. They were people. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Their eyes were hollow pits, their mouths stretched too wide, whispering in voices that weren't voices at all. A single word repeated over and over. Stay. One of them stepped forward, its face inches from mine. The skin on its cheeks fluttered as though something inside was trying to push through. You opened the door, it rasped. Now it's open for you. The floor shuddered beneath me. I realized the entire house was pulsing, every wall flexing like a massive beating heart. And the air smelled wrong, damp, sweet, like rotting fruit. I stumbled toward what I thought was a hallway, but the walls closed in, reshaping themselves, forcing me deeper instead of out. That's when I heard Ellie's voice again, faint, distant, echoing through the house like a memory. "Run!" But I couldn't run. The walls pressed tighter, and the whispering shadows swarmed closer, their faces blurred, melting into one another until they formed a single towering shape. It leaned down until its teeth, long, thin, too many, gleamed inches from my face. "You thought this house was empty," it whispered. "But it's never empty. It breathes. It feeds." And now, the floor vanished under me. I fell. Through darkness, through whispers, through the endless lungs of the house itself. And when I hit bottom, I realized the house wasn't just feeding. It was digesting. What if every horror story you've ever heard was never fiction, but a warning? The studio was in chaos. The storm outside battered the glass, making the whole building groan. Emergency lights flickered overhead, casting the newsroom in red and shadow. The police radios buzzed, but no one could understand the distorted voices. Emma and Daniel stood frozen, staring at the cracked monitor where the broadcast had cut off. The live feed of the old man had vanished, replaced by static. But beneath the static, a voice hissed, low, guttural, and ancient. "You have opened the door, and now you cannot close it." Emma's knees weakened. Daniel gripped her arm, whispering, "It's not possible. He wasn't even on air." The newsroom staff scrambled. One intern tried shutting down the feed, but every monitor lit up at once, playing the same broadcast. The old man's face, stitched and decaying, his mouth moving in unnatural jerks as though strings pulled him. And then, he began naming them. "Emma Carter, Daniel Ross, each of you has been chosen." The staff gasped as their own names began spilling from the speakers. Every single person in the room called out one by one. Panic spread. Some ran for the doors, but the moment they touched the handles, their bodies stiffened. One woman screamed as her eyes rolled back, collapsing in a twitching heap. Emma tried calling the police again, but her phone screen turned black. Instead of dialing, the same face appeared, whispering, laughing. "You wanted the truth. You wanted me to tell my story." Daniel shouted, "What do you want from us?" The old man's lips split into a smile. "An audience." The storm outside roared louder, shaking the building as if something enormous pressed against it. The glass windows warped inward. Then, every screen showed grainy footage of a morgue. Rows of bodies, their faces sewn shut with the same stitches. The camera panned slowly down the rows until it stopped on a body bag labeled Emma Carter. Emma stumbled back, choking on air. Daniel turned pale. "No, this isn't real. It's staged. It has to be." But the bag on screen began to twitch. The zipper slid down by itself, revealing Emma's own pale face inside. Eyes closed, lips sewn. The stitched mouth slowly opened, breaking thread, and whispered, "Don't you see? You've been dead since the broadcast began." The newsroom plunged into darkness. Screams erupted, cut short by sickening snaps, as one by one the staff were dragged into the shadows. Emma clung to Daniel, their breaths ragged, hearts pounding. In the pitch black, the voice returned, right beside her ear. "And now, the final story begins." The emergency lights flickered once more. Emma and Daniel were alone. Everyone else was gone, vanished, as if they had never existed. On the central monitor, a headline appeared in bold red letters. "Live, the final broadcast, starring Emma Carter, Daniel Ross." Emma's trembling hands rose to her face. Her skin felt wrong, like wax melting under her fingers. She looked to Daniel, but his expression was twisted, his jaw unhinged far too wide. His eyes flickered like static. He was smiling. The old man's voice echoed all around them. "The truth isn't what you report, it's what you become." The screens went black. And somewhere across the country, People sitting at home in their living rooms gasped as their televisions flickered, broadcasting Emma and Daniel's final moments live to millions. The storm outside cleared. The world looked normal again, but in living rooms everywhere, people whispered the same question in terror. What channel was that? And no one could ever find it again.
What if the motel room you checked into last night still had the previous guest inside, watching you from the walls? It was just supposed to be one night. A long drive from Nevada to Arizona, a dead phone, and a storm that turned the desert highway into a black void. When the rain started hammering down like nails on metal, Ethan Cole spotted a flickering sign through the fog. Moonlight Motel, vacancy. He almost laughed when he pulled in. The building looked like it hadn't seen a guest in years. 1 story high, 12 rooms, all arranged in a crooked line like teeth that had rotted over time. Neon lights buzzed overhead, fighting against the darkness. The front office light was on, but no one stood at the counter. A small bell sat next to a faded guest book. Ethan rang it twice before an old man emerged from the back, thin, stooped, with skin that looked paper thin under the fluorescent light. "Evening," the man croaked. "You're lucky. Only 1 room left. Number 9. Ethan chuckled nervously. "This place gets that busy, huh?" The old man didn't laugh. He just slid over a tarnished key. Not a card, an actual brass key. "We don't get many folks anymore," he said quietly. "But when we do, they don't usually stay long." Something in his tone made Ethan pause, but exhaustion outweighed curiosity. He signed the guest book and noticed something strange. The last entry was dated October 12, 1996. Today was June 3, 2022. He raised an eyebrow. "You guys don't get much business in 26 years?" The old man smiled without humor. "You could say that." Room 9 was at the far end of the lot. The paint peeled like dead skin. The number on the door was half missing, but the brass key fit perfectly. The room smelled faintly of mold and old cigarette smoke. The wallpaper was yellowed and bubbling, and a single bulb flickered above the bed. Still, it was dry, and the heater worked. Ethan threw his bag on the chair, kicked off his shoes, and collapsed. That's when he heard it. A faint knocking, not from the door but inside the wall behind the headboard. 3 short taps. Then silence. He froze, listening. Maybe it was pipes or the storm. But a few minutes later it came again. Tap, tap, tap. This time closer, louder, like knuckles brushing hollow wood. Ethan sat up. "Hello?" No answer, just the rain. He tried to shake it off and switched on the small TV. Static, no channels. He flipped it off, annoyed. The room felt colder than before, though he hadn't touched the thermostat. When he finally turned off the light to sleep, the knocking returned, slow and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Then whispering. It wasn't words, not exactly. Just a sound that felt human, like breath scraping across the drywall. Ethan's chest tightened. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. He turned on his phone flashlight and pressed his ear against the wall. Something shifted inside, like fabric dragging against wood. Then, a laugh. Low, childlike. He stumbled backward, dropping his phone. "Who's there?" No reply. The whispering stopped. He spent the rest of the night sitting upright, the TV's static flickering in the corner. Sometime near dawn, he must have dozed off because the next thing he knew, sunlight was pouring through the blinds. For a brief second, everything looked normal again, until he saw the mirror. The bathroom mirror was fogged, but not from steam. There were words scrawled across it, written with a finger. "Check out before midnight." Ethan's blood ran cold. He wiped the glass, but the letters didn't vanish. They were under the surface, etched into the mirror itself. He grabbed his bag and bolted for the front desk. The old man was there again, sitting perfectly still, as if he hadn't moved all night. Ethan slammed the key down. "Someone's messing around in that room. I heard knocking all night, and then there's writing in the damn mirror." The old man didn't react. His eyes were blank. "Did you sleep in there?" he asked quietly. "What?" "Yeah, The man sighed, rubbing his temples. "You shouldn't have done that." Ethan frowned. "What are you talking about?" The man leaned forward. "That room's been locked since '96. A family stayed there. Husband, wife, little girl. They never checked out. When we finally opened the door, there was no one inside. Just blood. The police sealed it. I shouldn't have rented it to you. Must have grabbed the wrong key." Ethan stared at him. "That's not possible. I was in there all night." The old man shook his head. "Then you weren't alone." Ethan's skin crawled. He stormed back toward the room, determined to prove it was all just superstition. The old man called after him, but he didn't listen. When he reached room 9, something was wrong. The door stood slightly open, and inside the air was icy cold. Everything looked exactly as he left it, except the walls. The wallpaper was ripped, torn in strips, and beneath it he saw wood, not drywall, but old timber boards like the inside of a barn. Each board had deep scratches, some shaped almost like letters, others like fingernails dragged in panic. He leaned closer and realized something. There were holes behind the wallpaper. Eye-sized holes. Dozens of them. He pressed his flashlight in one, expecting darkness. But he saw something moving, a quick, jerky shape, and then, unmistakably, a human eye staring back at him. Ethan staggered back, slamming into the dresser. "Jesus Christ," he shouted. The eye blinked, once, then disappeared. He ran out again, but the office was empty this time. The bell sat still. The guest book was gone. Even the Moonlight Motel sign outside had stopped flickering, now dark, dead, as if it had never been on. Ethan rushed to his car, fumbling with the keys. The rain had started again, harder than before. His engine sputtered once, then died. The motel lot stretched endlessly around him, swallowed by mist. He looked back toward the building, and his heart froze. Every single door from room 1 to 12 was wide open, and in each doorway stood a silhouette, still, watching. He couldn't see faces, just outlines, men, women, and one small figure with long hair standing in front of room 9, the same room he'd stayed in. Then, through the roar of the rain, he heard that knocking again, 3 short taps, and a whisper that seemed to echo right beside his ear. "You shouldn't have looked inside the walls." Ethan screamed and turned, but the lot was empty. When he looked back, the motel was gone, just a stretch of desert highway behind him. Hours later, a police officer found his car idling on the roadside, lights still on, doors open. No sign of Ethan, only a motel key on the dashboard, room 9. And carved into the metal of the key were 3 words, "See you tonight." The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt, baking away the rain that had drenched the highway only hours before. Officer Dana Holloway stood beside the abandoned car, her boots sinking slightly into the soft dirt at the shoulder of the road. The vehicle was still warm, engine humming softly, driver's door wide open. But there was no sign of Ethan Cole. She had seen a lot in her 15 years with the Arizona State Police, but something about this scene unsettled her in a way she couldn't explain. The man's phone lay on the passenger seat, still on the lock screen, wallet intact, keys in the ignition. But what drew her attention most was the brass motel key, glinting under the sun. It looked old, too old to belong to any functioning business. The tag read, "Moonlight Motel, Room 9. Holloway called it in. "Dispatch, I've got a 1057 abandoned vehicle, male owner 32, registered to Ethan Cole out of Reno. Possible missing person." Static filled the radio before the operator replied. "Copy that. Moonlight Motel, you said?" "Affirmative," Dana said, squinting at the tag. A pause. Then the dispatcher's voice returned, softer this time. "That place burned down in 1997. It's been condemned for decades." Dana frowned. "What are you talking about? There's no way. This key looks new." But when she looked closer, she realized the brass wasn't shiny at all. It was worn, pitted, as if it had spent decades buried underground, and scratched faintly across the tag were words carved by hand. "See you tonight." A chill crawled up her spine despite the heat. That evening she drove out toward the old route where the motel supposedly stood. It wasn't even on modern maps anymore, but she'd grown up in this county. She knew the back roads that twisted through the desert like veins. As she drove, the radio started to hiss and cut out, the signal fading into a low hum that almost sounded like breathing. At around 8:30 p.m., she saw it. Through the settling dusk, an outline emerged from the scrub. A long, sagging structure with 12 rooms, paint peeled to bone. Above it hung a half-dead neon sign, Moonlight Motel. Only 2 letters still glowed faintly, L and T. Donna parked and stepped out, flashlight in hand. The air felt unnaturally cold for a desert night. Each breath came out in small clouds. She walked toward the front office, her footsteps crunching over broken glass and sand. Inside, everything was coated in a layer of dust. The counter stood crooked, the guest book torn in half. On the back wall hung a frame with 12 brass keys. Only room 9 was missing. She brushed dust off the desk and noticed something strange. The calendar behind the counter was frozen on October 1996. The same month the dispatcher mentioned. There were circles drawn around the dates from the 10th to the 12th, the days before the supposed fire. A file cabinet stood in the corner, drawers half open. She flipped through faded paperwork until she found one labeled Incident Report, the Collins family. The page inside was water-stained but legible. October 12, 1996. Fire discovered at approximately 2:13 a.m. Suspected gas leak. No bodies recovered. Witness reports strange noises the night before, possibly child distress sounds. Motel permanently closed. No bodies. No resolution. Just another desert ghost story. But when Dana shone her flashlight toward the far hallway, she froze. There was a fresh footprint in the dust, boot-sized, heavy, and recent. It led straight toward room 9. Every instinct told her to call for backup. But curiosity, or maybe something darker, pulled her forward. The door to room 9 hung slightly ajar, the brass number crooked. She pushed it open slowly. The room looked untouched by time. The wallpaper was yellowed, curled at the edges, the furniture outdated but intact. Yet the air felt heavy, charged with something electric. Dana's flashlight beam shook slightly as she scanned the room, until it caught the mirror above the sink. The words were still there. Check out before midnight. But this time, something new had been added underneath in smaller script, almost like it had been scratched by a fingernail. He didn't. A sudden noise broke the silence, a soft creak from behind the wall. She swung her flashlight toward the sound, realizing it came from behind the bed's headboard. The wallpaper bulged slightly, as if the wall was breathing. Dana took a step closer. "Who's there?" No response. Only a slow, hollow thump. 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 Rhythmic. Deliberate. She backed away and reached for her radio. "Dispatch, I've got movement inside the structure. Possible vagrant." Her voice cut out as static hissed violently through the speaker. A faint whisper overlapped it. A child's voice, barely audible. "He saw me." The radio went dead. The lights above flickered, casting the room in alternating flashes of brightness and shadow. Dana's pulse hammered in her ears. She ripped open the wallpaper where the noise came from, and what she saw made her stumble back, dropping her flashlight. Behind the paper wasn't drywall. It was a hollow wooden partition filled with rotted beams and, worse, peering holes. Eye-level holes carved into the wood. She picked up her flashlight and aimed it inside. For a moment she saw nothing but darkness. Then her beam caught the outline of something pale. Skin? A hand? Her light trembled as she stepped closer, and that's when a face appeared in the hole. Not a reflection, not a trick of the shadows. A woman's face, hollow-eyed, skin gray, lips cracked open into a silent scream. Dana screamed and stumbled backward, falling hard against the nightstand. When she looked up again, the face was gone. But something else had appeared, written across the wall in large, shaky letters. "Welcome back, Sheriff." Her flashlight flickered out completely. She stumbled toward the door, heart pounding, trying to remember which direction the car was. But when she burst outside, the parking lot was no longer empty. All 12 doors were wide open, and figures stood in each doorway, faint, shimmering silhouettes, like outlines burned into the air. Men, women, and a small child clutching something like a teddy bear. They didn't move, didn't speak. But as Dana backed away, she noticed one thing that made her stomach twist. They were facing room 9, not her, watching it, waiting for something. A sound echoed behind her, a low rumble like a door slamming shut. She turned, but room 9's door was already closed tight. Then, slowly, it began to open on its own. Inside, the shadows shifted, and for the briefest second, Dana saw Ethan Cole, the missing man, standing in the center of the room. His clothes were torn, eyes vacant. His mouth moved as if whispering something, but no sound came out. Then, suddenly, his head jerked toward her with unnatural speed. His eyes met hers, and she could finally hear him. A hoarse whisper that chilled her blood. "You came back. Just like before." Before she could respond, the floor beneath her gave way. She crashed through the rotted boards into pitch darkness. The air below was wet and cold, thick with the smell of decay. When she raised her flashlight, its weak beam revealed a hidden crawl space, lined with wooden walls covered in scratches. Some looked like words, others looked like claw marks. And then she saw them. Bodies. 3 of them. A man, a woman, and a little girl, half mummified by time. Their faces twisted in frozen terror. Each one had a small hole bored through their skull, right at the temple. The man's mouth was open, filled with dirt. Something shiny glinted between his teeth. A motel key. Dana reached forward, trembling, brushing the dirt aside. Room 9. Before she could react, a soft voice whispered from the dark behind her, the voice of a little girl. "He made us watch." The beam of her flashlight flickered, and then darkness. When Dana finally crawled out into the open air hours later, the motel was gone. Only sand, wind, and the echo of whispers remained. But in her hand, she still clutched the cold brass key. And carved into it now, where the words, "See you tonight" had been, was something new. Checked in. The next morning, Sheriff Dana Holloway sat motionless in her office, staring at the brass motel key resting on her desk. The desert light slanted through the blinds, painting long, ghostly stripes across the metal. She hadn't slept. She hadn't even changed her clothes. Her radio was silent. Her phone was dead. Every rational part of her mind told her what she'd seen couldn't have been real. But the dirt under her fingernails, the bruises on her arms, and the faint smell of smoke in her hair said otherwise. The motel key gleamed faintly in the morning sun, its engraving clear as day. Checked in. Dana picked it up carefully, half expecting it to burn her skin. She'd gone back to the site at dawn, driven by the impossible need to prove to herself that she wasn't losing her mind. But there had been nothing. No ruins, no burnt foundation, just flat desert earth. Like the Moonlight Motel had never existed at all. She tried to tell herself she had hallucinated the entire thing. Stress, exhaustion, dehydration. It was all possible. Until she noticed something else on her desk. A file she had never seen before. Its label, written in her own handwriting. Moonlight Motel. Case number 314. She froze. What the hell? Her name was listed as the investigating officer. The date marked October 13th, 1996, the day after the motel's fire. But Dana hadn't even joined the police academy until 2002. She flipped open the folder, her hands trembling. Inside were black and white crime scene photos, charred debris, broken glass, and 3 bodies pulled from the rubble. The last photo made her stomach turn. It was a picture of her, 15 years old, standing outside the burnt motel, covered in soot, staring blankly at the camera. Her breath caught in her throat. No, that's not possible. But she remembered something then, like a dream slipping through fog. A smell of smoke, a woman screaming, a man banging on a door that wouldn't open. She'd buried that memory for decades, never questioning why she avoided that stretch of highway. Now she knew. She had been there. By noon, Dana was driving again. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She needed answers, and the only person who might have them was the county archivist, Ernest Gibbons, a frail man who'd spent 40 years cataloging forgotten police reports. When she arrived, he was hunched over a filing cabinet, humming an old tune. "Sheriff Holloway," he said without looking up, "I was just thinking about you. Strange, isn't it?" Dana frowned. "Why?" He smiled weakly. "Because I had a dream last night. About room 9. Her skin prickled. "What do you know about it, Ernest?" He motioned for her to sit. "You won't find Moonlight Motel on any recent map. It was built in 1954 by a man named Arthur Vance. He ran it until the night it burned. They said it was a gas leak, but..." Ernest hesitated, lowering his voice. "People believed he was doing something darker, that he made films in those rooms. Not the kind shown in theaters." Dana's chest tightened. "What kind of films?" "Home movies, but not of living people." He opened a dusty folder and pulled out a faded photograph. A man stood behind a 16mm camera, grinning. His eyes were hollow black pits in the photo, like the ink had bled through. "That's Vance. After the fire, they found reels of film in his basement, burnt, melted, but one was still intact. The footage showed guests sleeping in their rooms, filmed through holes in the walls." Dana's pulse quickened. "The holes..." Ernest nodded. He'd carved them behind every bed, watched his guests for weeks. Some vanished. The Collins family was the last. "Why wasn't he arrested?" Ernest looked at her for a long time. "Because he died in the fire, or so they thought. His body was never found. Some say he still checks in guests who lose their way on the highway." Dana stood abruptly. "I have to see the original file." Ernest pointed down the hall. "Basement, drawer marked closed cases. But if you go down there, Sheriff..." His voice lowered to a trembling whisper. "Don't stay after dark." The basement smelled of dust and rusted metal. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering like dying insects. Rows of cabinets stretched endlessly, labeled by decade. Dana found the one marked 1990s and pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside were dozens of old VHS tapes and film reels, each tagged "Moonlight Motel Evidence." She picked one labeled Tape 9, Final Guest, and slid it into a nearby player. The screen crackled with static, then cleared. The footage was grainy, black and white. A man entered a motel room and set down his suitcase. Ethan Cole. Dana's heart stopped. She watched as Ethan sat on the bed, lit a cigarette, and rubbed his eyes. Behind him, through a small hole in the wall, another camera recorded his every move. The timestamp read June 3rd, 2022, the day he vanished. Then Ethan turned toward the mirror. On its surface were faint letters. "Check out before midnight." Suddenly, the lights flickered. Ethan looked straight into the camera as though he could see her. His mouth moved, and though the tape had no sound, Dana could read his lips. "You came back." The screen went black. Her blood ran cold. She ejected the tape and dropped it, her hands shaking uncontrollably. That message, those same words, Ethan had said them to her inside the motel. But how could he have known her? How could a recording from a burned building show her in the present? Then she noticed something at the edge of the table. A guest book, just like the one she'd seen at the motel front desk. The ink was smeared, but one entry stood out clearly. Ethan Cole, June 3rd, 2022. And right beneath it, in red ink that looked almost fresh, Sheriff Dana Holloway, arrived, October 13th, 1996. Never checked out. Her flashlight flickered as the basement lights dimmed. Somewhere in the darkness, a door creaked open. Dana froze. The voice that followed was soft and calm, yet carried an echo that seemed to come from every direction. "You always come back here, Dana. You just forget." She spun around, gun drawn. "Who's there?" The shadow in the far corner began to move. Slowly, deliberately. It took the shape of a tall man, wearing a dark overcoat, his face half hidden in shadow. "I keep the rooms ready," he said, "for my guests who can't let go." "Arthur Vance," Dana whispered. He tilted his head slightly, amused. "You remember my name? That's progress." "I'm not your guest," she hissed. "You're dead." Vance stepped closer, the air around him rippling like heat waves. His voice deepened, almost reverent. "Death is just another room. Some of us never check out." Dana fired her gun. The shot echoed through the basement, but when the smoke cleared, he was gone. Only a key clattered to the floor, spinning to a stop at her boots. It was brass, aged, engraved with a single number, 10. She stumbled out of the archive, heart hammering. Her car engine roared to life, gravel spraying behind her as she sped down the empty highway. The sun was setting, bleeding orange across the horizon. She should have gone home, should have turned back. But something compelled her forward. The key in her pocket burned against her leg like a brand, pulling her back toward that cursed stretch of desert. As night fell, the Moonlight Motel appeared again, its lights flickering faintly through the dust storm. This time, all 12 doors were open, glowing from within. Room 9's door swung gently in the wind, but room 10, the one from her key, was closed tight. Dana parked, gripping her gun, her breath shallow. She could hear faint music playing from inside the motel, something warped and distant, like an old lullaby playing through broken speakers. When she reached room 10, she hesitated. The key fit perfectly. The lock clicked open with a soft, deliberate sound, like it had been waiting for her all along. The room inside was pristine, too clean. The walls gleamed white, the furniture neatly arranged, a camera tripod standing in the corner facing the bed. On the bed lay a guest book, open. There were only 2 names written inside, Arthur Vance and Dana Holloway. Under departure, both spaces were blank. The door slammed shut behind her. The light bulb overhead buzzed, then exploded. And in the flash before total darkness, she saw them again. Ethan, the Collins family, and a dozen more shadowy guests, standing silently in the corners of the room, watching, waiting. And from behind the wall, Arthur Vance's voice whispered once more, "Now we can finish the film." The air inside room 10 grew thick, heavy enough to choke on. Dust floated in slow motion through the single shaft of moonlight slicing across the bed. Dana Holloway stood frozen, one hand still gripping the door handle that had just slammed shut behind her. Her pulse was a drumbeat in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her feet wouldn't move. The figures surrounding her didn't speak. They didn't even breathe. Ethan Cole's hollow eyes stared straight ahead, his face drained of anything human. The little girl from the Collins family clutched her stuffed bear, its button eyes hanging by a thread. The other guests, all 12 of them, stood in the shadows like mannequins waiting for direction. And in that moment, the overhead light flickered once, humming with electricity. A second later, the camera in the corner whirred to life. Its red recording light blinked on. Dana felt her throat tighten. "No," she whispered. "You're not doing this." But the camera turned on its tripod, all on its own, until its unblinking eye fixed on her. Then came the voice, low, calm, and sickeningly familiar. "Welcome home, Dana." She turned toward the sound. From the adjoining door between room 9 and 10 stepped Arthur Vance. He looked unchanged from the photograph Ernest had shown her earlier. Same slicked hair, same pale grin. Only his eyes betrayed him. They were bottomless voids, black and glistening like oil. Dana raised her gun again, her hand trembling. "You're dead, Vance." He smiled faintly, his voice smooth as silk. "And yet here you are talking to me. What do you want from me?" Vance moved closer, his shoes not quite touching the floor. "You already know," he said softly. "You always knew. You were my last guest." Her grip tightened on the gun. "I was a child. I didn't even know you." "Oh, but you did," he said, tilting his head. "You lived just down the road. Your mother was my housekeeper. You loved to play in the rooms when she worked. You'd hide behind the curtains and pretend to be invisible. I used to watch you through the walls." Dana's stomach turned. "You're lying." Vance's grin widened. "You called me Uncle Art." A flash of memory hit her like lightning, her small hands pressing against a cool wall, hearing laughter on the other side. A camera clicking. Her mother's voice saying, "Dana, don't go in there." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "No," she breathed. "No, that's not possible." "Oh, it's very possible," Vance whispered. "You were the first child I filmed. You were the only one who survived the fire. And when you grew up, you came back. Because a part of you never left." The lights flickered again. The camera's motor whined louder. On the wall behind Dana, the old wallpaper began to curl, revealing rows of wooden boards, each carved with names. She stepped closer, shining her flashlight. Every guest who had ever stayed at the Moonlight Motel was etched into that wall. The Collins family, Ethan Cole, Ernest Gibbons, even her own name, written twice, Dana Holloway, checked in 1996. Dana Holloway, checked in 2022, and beneath both, scratched in jagged letters, never checked out. Her breath came in short gasps. "You can't keep me here." Vance chuckled softly, walking toward the camera. "You've already been here for years. Every time you leave, the film resets. You drive away thinking it's over, but it's only the reel starting again." He pointed at the blinking light on the camera. "You see, Dana, this motel doesn't burn. It remembers. It feeds on those who stay too long. You, me, Ethan, the Collins family, we're all just frames." The room began to spin, the walls melting like old film catching fire. The smell of smoke filled the air again, the same choking chemical scent she'd buried deep in her mind since childhood. Through the haze, Dana saw herself as a little girl sitting on the motel floor, staring up at a man with a camera. Arthur's voice echoed, distorted and overlapping itself. "Smile for the real, sweetheart. That's it. Don't move." Then the image burned away in a flash of white. Dana screamed, clutching her head. The floorboards beneath her rattled violently. Ethan and the others began to move now, not walking, but twitching like marionettes pulled by invisible strings. Their faces contorted into silent cries, mouths opening wider than seemed possible. The sound that filled the air wasn't human. It was static, overlapping whispers, like every voice that had ever died there was trying to speak at once. Arthur stood in the center of it all, calm, almost proud. "They belong here. You all do. You're part of my final masterpiece." The walls split open, revealing narrow tunnels behind them. Inside, dozens of cameras were embedded in the wood, their red lights blinking like eyes. Dana's fury cut through her terror. "You didn't build a motel," she shouted. "You built a tomb." Arthur's smile faded. For the first time, something like anger flashed in his dark eyes. "No, I built eternity." He reached toward her, his hand stretching longer than human, fingers curling like claws. "And now you'll never leave." But something inside Dana changed in that moment. Maybe it was defiance. Maybe it was pure survival. She remembered the basement, the old tapes, and the one thing every victim had in common, the mirror. She turned toward it now, that cracked rectangle of glass hanging over the dresser. Through the smoke and light, she could see faint reflections. The ghosts, the child, Arthur standing behind her. And suddenly, she understood. The motel wasn't a place. It was a loop, a recording trapped in reflection. Arthur's camera didn't just film, it captured. It held their souls inside the silvered glass of mirrors, replaying their terror for eternity. She stared into her own reflection and whispered, "I'm not your film." Then she raised her gun and fired, not at Arthur, but straight into the mirror. The glass shattered, exploding outward in a blinding burst of light. The sound that followed was like the world tearing apart. 1,000 screams, 1,000 memories unspooling all at once. The figures around her dissolved into smoke. The room shook violently. Arthur's voice bellowed through the chaos. "You can't destroy what's already recorded," Dana shouted back through the noise. "Then I'll erase it." She fired again, hitting the camera. The red light flickered and died. The walls groaned and splintered as flames erupted from the floor, swallowing the room whole. Arthur reached for her one last time, his face twisting with rage, but as the fire consumed him, he began to crumble into ash, scattering like burned film. Dana fell to her knees, coughing, the world collapsing around her. Heat seared her lungs, but she could see something beyond the flames. A door. The same door she had entered through, now glowing white. She crawled toward it, every breath a struggle. When she reached it, she turned back for a moment. Room 9 and 10 were gone. Only the desert wind roared through a black void where the motel had stood. And for the first time, the voices were silent. She pushed the door open and stepped into the cool night air. The highway stretched before her, empty, endless, real. Her patrol car sat parked on the shoulder, engine idling. The brass key was gone from her pocket. In its place was a small piece of mirror, smooth and cold. For a long moment she just stood there, breathing. Then, trembling, she whispered to herself, "It's over." But as she climbed into her car, the radio crackled to life. Static at first. Then a faint, familiar voice. "Room 9. Vacancy." Her eyes widened. She turned off the radio immediately, but the sound didn't stop. It came from behind her now, from the back seat. A man's voice. Calm, polite. "Evening, Sheriff. I believe you still owe me one final scene." She turned slowly. The passenger seat was empty, but the rearview mirror, cracked down the center, showed Arthur Vance sitting behind her, smiling through the reflection. And hanging from the mirror by a chain was a single brass key swaying gently as the car idled. Room 9. I've never told this story to anyone in detail. Not because I don't want to, but because whenever I start, people laugh and assume I'm exaggerating. Maybe you will too. But I swear, what I experienced in that motel outside Flagstaff, Arizona still haunts me every single night I try to close my eyes. Back in 2014, I was driving cross-country. My plan was to take old Route 66 from Chicago all the way to Los Angeles. It wasn't for work or anything noble like soul-searching. It was just a personal bucket list trip. I was in my mid-20s, restless and going through the kind of heartbreak that makes you want to disappear for a while. That night, after nearly 12 hours of driving, my GPS led me off the main highway and onto a 2-lane road cutting through the desert. There were no big-name hotels anywhere around, just endless stretches of sand and cactus. I was exhausted, and when I spotted a flickering neon sign that read, "Desert Moon Motel Vacancy," I didn't think twice. The building looked ancient, single-story, U-shaped, with about 12 rooms facing a cracked parking lot. The office door was propped open, and a small bell jingled when I stepped inside. Behind the counter was a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. His greasy hair clung to his forehead, his eyes had deep purple bags beneath them, and his smile was oddly forced, like he was practicing how to look friendly. "You just passing through?" he asked, voice raspy. "Yeah," I said. "Just need a room for the night." He hesitated, glanced at the wall of keys, then slowly took down one marked room 6. His hand lingered on it, almost like he didn't want to give it to me. "Cash only," he muttered. $80. That should have been my first red flag, but exhaustion makes you careless. I handed him the bills, grabbed the key, and drove my car around to room 6. The room was exactly what you'd expect from a roadside motel. Faded carpet, an old box TV, and that faint, musty smell of mildew mixed with cigarette smoke. But what caught my attention were the curtains. They weren't the usual motel beige or brown. These were deep crimson red, heavy velvet fabric, the kind you'd see in a theater, not in some cheap desert inn. I remember thinking it was weird, but I was too tired to care. I set my bags down, showered in the grimy bathroom, and collapsed onto the creaky bed. That's when things started to get strange. At around 1:30 a.m., I woke up suddenly. The room was freezing cold, colder than the desert night should have been. I checked the thermostat. It was off. Then I noticed something. The curtains were swaying, ever so slightly, like someone had brushed past them. I froze. The window was shut. The AC wasn't on. There was no draft. Lying in bed, I stared at those red curtains, half expecting someone to step out from behind them. My heart hammered, but after 10 minutes of nothing happening, I convinced myself it was just my tired mind playing tricks. I rolled over, shut my eyes, and eventually drifted back to sleep. The second time I woke, it was to the sound of whispering. I couldn't make out the words, just soft, rapid murmurs like several voices speaking at once. The sound was coming from near the curtains. My skin went cold. I sat up, holding my breath, listening. The whispers grew louder, overlapping each other until they stopped all at once. I reached for the lamp and flicked it on. The curtains weren't swaying anymore. But, I swear to God, for just a second, I thought I saw the outline of a face pressing from behind the fabric. Pale skin, hollow eyes, then gone. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I marched straight to the front office. The man behind the desk looked worse than before, like he hadn't moved all night. His eyes flicked to my room key before I even said a word. "Everything okay in room 6?" he asked. I almost told him about the whispers, the face, the freezing cold. But something in the way he asked, too casual, like he already knew, made me stop. Instead, I forced a smile and said, "Yeah, just fine." I checked out and drove off, vowing never to return. But here's where the story should have ended. It didn't. 2 months later, back in Chicago, I got curious. I typed Desert Moon Motel Flagstaff into Google. The first result was a local news article dated 2001. The headline made my stomach drop. "Motel Murder, Woman Found Dead, Behind Room 6 Curtains." Her name was Melissa Grant. A 29-year-old traveler, strangled and hidden behind those heavy red drapes. The killer was never caught. The article mentioned one disturbing detail. Guests who stayed in room 6 after the murder complained of hearing voices at night and feeling watched. Some even claimed to see Melissa's face pressed against the curtains. My blood ran cold. But here's the part that still keeps me awake. I dug deeper, scrolling through old forums and archived blogs. I found a post from a trucker dated 2010. He said he stayed in room 6 and saw something different, not a woman. He described a man's face, pale, hollow-eyed, watching from behind the curtain. Another guest in 2012 said the same, not Melissa, a man. And then I realized something that made me want to vomit. When I saw that face pressing against the fabric, it wasn't a woman's. It was a man's. But the killer was never caught. Which means, what if he's still there? What if he never left the motel at all? What if those curtains don't hide Melissa's spirit, but the man who killed her? I swear, when I close my eyes at night, I can still hear the whispers. And sometimes, I think they're not coming from my memory at all. Sometimes I think they're still coming from behind those red curtains. I used to work the night shift at a small roadside motel in New Mexico back in 2009. I was 21, broke, and had just dropped out of community college. The job wasn't glamorous, mostly just checking in the occasional trucker, restocking the vending machine, and making sure no one trashed the rooms. But the one thing I'll never forget is the night something walked into the lobby, something that shouldn't have been there at all. The motel was called Sundown Inn. It sat right off Interstate 40, surrounded by nothing but desert, scrub brush, and a gas station across the road that closed by midnight. That stretch of highway was lonely at night. Once traffic died down, it was just silence, broken only by the buzz of the neon vacancy sign outside and the occasional rumble of an 18-wheeler speeding past. Most nights, I'd sit behind the counter with a paperback or an old radio playing static-filled country music. The office had this glass front that looked out at the parking lot, and sometimes when I was bored, I'd stare at the reflection instead of the empty desert. You'd be surprised how easy it is to freak yourself out in that kind of silence. That night, it must have been close to 3 a.m., I was half asleep in the chair when I heard the lobby door creak open. I jolted upright, expecting to see some weary traveler. Instead, I saw a man standing in the doorway completely still. He didn't walk in right away. He just stood there, framed by the buzzing neon light. I remember every detail about him: long black coat, dust-covered boots, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low enough that I couldn't see his eyes. His clothes looked old-fashioned, not like a costume, but genuinely worn from another time. His skin was pale, almost gray, and when he finally stepped into the light of the lobby, I noticed his lips were cracked and dry as if he hadn't had water in days. "Need a room?" I asked, trying to shake off the unease crawling up my spine. He didn't answer. He just tilted his head slightly like he was studying me. After a long pause, he rasped, "Room 13. Here's the thing. We didn't have a room 13. The motel only had 12 rooms. I laughed nervously and said, "Sorry, sir, no room 13 here, just 12. The man's cracked lips stretched into the faintest smile. 13, he repeated, firmer this time. I should have told him to leave. I should have locked the door. But instead, I reached for the key rack behind me, as if checking to prove my point. Sure enough, there was no key labeled 13. When I turned back, the man was gone. The lobby door hadn't opened. The bell above it hadn't jingled. He had just vanished. I sat frozen, my pulse pounding in my ears. Eventually, I convinced myself it was exhaustion, maybe even a hallucination. Working the night shift does things to your brain. I didn't even tell my manager the next day. But the story doesn't end there. 2 nights later, a couple checked into room 7. Around 2 a.m., the woman came storming into the lobby, shaking, clutching her husband's arm. "There's someone outside our window," she said, breathless. I grabbed the flashlight and went with them back to their room. Sure enough, the window screen was bent and the curtains were swaying, but there were no footprints in the dirt outside, just undisturbed desert sand. The couple insisted they'd seen a man in a long black coat and hat standing at the glass watching them. I didn't sleep the rest of that shift. Over the next month, it kept happening. Different guests in different rooms, all claiming to see the same man. Always at night. Always silent. Always gone by the time anyone looked outside. One trucker even left in the middle of the night, throwing his keys on the counter and muttering, "You didn't warn me." Warn him about what? I didn't know. At least not yet. Curiosity got the better of me. I started asking around. Locals, older employees, anyone who might know. That's when I learned the motel had been built in the early 70s, right on top of the ruins of an older roadside inn. The original inn had burned down in the 1950s after a mysterious fire killed several guests. One of them was a traveling salesman, found charred beyond recognition in what was recorded as room 13. But here's where it gets darker. I eventually found a microfilm copy of the old newspaper article in the town library. It mentioned something chilling. Witnesses swore they saw the salesman walking the halls even after the fire had been extinguished, standing in doorways, watching. The Sundown Inn never had a room 13, but maybe he thought it did. Maybe he's still looking for it. The last time I worked that shift before quitting, I swear on everything I saw him again. This time it wasn't through the lobby door. It wasn't in the reflection of the glass. It was in the hallway, standing directly in front of room 7. I froze, gripping my flashlight so hard my knuckles turned white. The beam of light landed on him, but his shadow didn't fall against the wall. His hat tilted slowly toward me, and for the first time I saw his eyes. They weren't human. They were black, bottomless. And when he whispered, I swear it wasn't English. It was something older, something that made my stomach twist in ways I can't explain. I turned and ran. The next day, I quit. I never went back. But sometimes, when I'm driving late at night and pass by old motels, I glance at the windows, and every now and then I swear I see him, standing there, waiting, and I always wonder, if one night I make the mistake of pulling in, would he finally lead me to room 13? I grew up in Kansas, and back when I was fresh out of high school, I took a job cleaning rooms at a rundown roadside motel called Pioneer Lodge. It was the kind of place that had been there forever, sun-bleached signs, a pool long since drained, and rooms with shag carpet older than I was. Truckers and drifters mostly stayed there, sometimes families passing through if they were desperate, but no one ever lingered. The place felt temporary, like a halfway point between nowhere and somewhere else. I didn't mind the job at first. It was quiet, easy work, just vacuuming, scrubbing bathrooms, changing sheets. But after a few weeks, I started noticing something strange. One particular room, room 9, was never available to guests. The manager, an older guy named Carl, always skipped over it when assigning cleaning duties. When I asked about it, he just said, "Don't worry about 9, it's not in use." At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it had plumbing issues or was being renovated. But the more I worked there, the more room 9 started to bother me. Every time I pushed my cleaning cart past it, I'd swear I could feel cold air seeping from the crack under the door. The hallway could be boiling hot in the summer, but that strip of space by room 9 always felt icy, like someone had left the AC blasting inside. One afternoon, when Carl stepped out for a smoke, I decided to peek. The door wasn't locked, just shut. I turned the knob and slipped inside. The smell hit me first, damp, stale, like wet earth mixed with mildew. The curtains were drawn tight, but even in the dim light, I could see that the room hadn't been cleaned in years. Dust coated the furniture. The carpet was stiff and discolored. The bed was unmade, sheets twisted as if someone had just climbed out. On the nightstand, there was a half-empty glass of water. That detail made my stomach turn. It hadn't been touched by dust. The water was clear, fresh. I backed out quickly, telling myself Carl probably used the room to crash during long shifts. But something about the atmosphere in there didn't feel like sleep. It felt like a presence. I didn't say anything for weeks. But then, one morning, I came in early and found Carl in the lobby, looking pale and tired. A woman had checked out abruptly in the middle of the night, leaving her key behind without explanation. She said she couldn't stay another minute, Carl muttered, more to himself than to me. Said she saw someone standing in her room. When I asked which room she had stayed in, he hesitated. His eyes flicked toward the row of keys on the wall. Room 8, the room right next to room 9. From that night on, I started paying attention. Guests who stayed in 7 or 8 rarely lasted long. They'd complain of cold drafts, knocks on the wall, or voices at night. One man stormed into the lobby at 2 a.m., insisting there was a man sitting in the chair by his bed when he woke up. Carl refunded him and pretended to brush it off, but I could tell by the way his hands shook that he wasn't surprised. Finally, I pressed him. "What's in room 9?" I asked. He stared at me for a long time, then sighed. "You want the truth?" Back in the 70s, a traveling salesman checked in. No one ever saw him check out. When the maid went to clean, she found him dead in the bed. Heart attack, maybe. But here's the thing. He was sitting upright, eyes open, like he'd been waiting for something. Carl rubbed his temples, his voice low. "We closed off the room after that, but people keep seeing him. They say he walks the halls, peeks through the curtains, even sits at the edge of their beds. I wanted to laugh it off, but I couldn't. Not after what I had seen in room 9. not after the untouched water glass. One evening, as the sun was setting and the guests were filtering into their rooms, I lingered in the hallway outside 9. The air was cold again, unnaturally so. I pressed my ear to the door. At first, silence. Then, faint breathing. Slow, steady, ragged. My heart pounded. I pulled back and nearly ran, but something compelled me to try the knob again. This time, when I turned it, the door resisted, as if someone on the other side was holding it shut. That night, I dreamt of a man in a wrinkled suit sitting on the bed in room 9, staring at the door with wide, glassy eyes. His lips were blue, his hands twitching, and when he finally spoke, it wasn't words. It was a low, guttural moan that rattled my bones. I woke up drenched in sweat. The next day, Carl told me room 9 had been sealed for good. He nailed the door shut, boarded the window from the inside, and even moved a dresser in front of it. "No one goes in, not anymore," he said firmly. I quit not long after, but even now, years later, when I drive through that stretch of Kansas, I feel the urge to stop by and see if the Pioneer Lodge still stands. Because the truth is, I don't think sealing that door kept him inside. Sometimes, late at night when I'm staying at motels during long trips, I wake to the sound of steady breathing in the dark. And I know, deep down, that the guest from room 9 never really checked out. I used to travel constantly for work, crisscrossing the country as a regional sales rep. Between airports and freeways, I practically lived in motels for years. Most were forgettable. Cheap mattresses, bad coffee, the kind of places you never think about again. But there's one night I can't shake, no matter how much time passes. It happened at a small roadside motel in Missouri, and every time I close my eyes, I see her standing there in the parking lot, waiting for me to acknowledge her. It was late autumn, already dark by the time I pulled off the interstate. I'd been driving for 8 straight hours and my eyes felt like sandpaper. The motel I found was nothing special. A squat L-shaped building with faded paint and a buzzing neon sign that read, "Rest Easy Inn." The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few scattered cars. Inside the office, a middle-aged woman sat behind the counter, chain smoking, ashtray overflowing. She barely looked at me as she slid the key across the counter. "Room 11, she muttered. No smile, no small talk, just like she couldn't wait for me to leave. Room 11 was at the far end of the row, near a flickering street lamp that barely lit the asphalt. The room itself was typical. Faded floral bedspread, squeaky bathroom faucet, old TV with static channels. Nothing unusual. I dropped my bags, showered quickly, and crawled into bed. I must have fallen asleep instantly, but sometime after midnight I woke up to a sound that made my skin prickle. It wasn't a bang or a knock. It was softer, like the crunch of gravel under slow footsteps. I sat up, listening. The sound came again, deliberate, measured. Someone was walking across the parking lot. I pushed the curtain aside just a fraction and peeked out. That's when I saw her. A woman stood under the flickering street lamp. She wore a pale nightgown that fluttered in the breeze, her hair long and tangled, face obscured by shadows. She wasn't moving, wasn't pacing. She was just standing there, perfectly still, head tilted slightly toward my room. My first thought was that maybe she was another guest. Maybe she'd locked herself out or was waiting for someone to pick her up. But there was something about the way she stood, unnaturally rigid, arms hanging limp at her sides, that made my throat go dry. I watched for several minutes, waiting for her to walk away or wave for help. She didn't. She just stood there, staring at room 11. Finally, I let the curtain drop and tried to shake it off. Exhaustion was messing with me. But when I lay back down, I couldn't stop picturing her. Every creak of the motel walls, every gust of wind against the window, I thought it was her moving closer. Sometime later, maybe an hour, I woke again. This time the sound wasn't footsteps. It was scratching. Soft, deliberate, slow scratching at my door. My pulse thundered in my ears. I sat frozen, listening as the sound dragged against the wood, paused, then came again. I forced myself to peek through the peephole, but all I saw was darkness. Whoever was out there knew exactly where to stand. I almost called the front desk, but something told me not to. I didn't want to explain. I didn't want to admit what I thought was happening. The scratching went on for what felt like forever. Then silence. When morning finally came, I stumbled out of the room, bleary-eyed and shaking. The parking lot was empty, the street lamp off. But right at my door, in the dust on the ground, I saw faint footprints, bare feet, small, delicate. I told myself it was just a guest messing around, maybe someone drunk or unstable. I even forced a laugh as I loaded my suitcase into the car. But just as I was about to drive away, I noticed something that turned my blood cold. Near the back of the lot was an old, weathered bulletin board covered in flyers. Lost pets, local events, garage sales. Among them, one faded photo caught my eye. It was a missing person notice, dated 1987. The photo showed a young woman with long hair wearing a pale nightgown. The caption beneath read, "Last seen near Rest Easy Inn. If you have information, please contact." My stomach flipped. It had been decades since she vanished. And yet I had seen her, standing under that street lamp, watching me. I drove off without looking back, but even now, whenever I check into a motel, I make sure the parking lot is empty. And still, some nights, I wake to the faint sound of gravel crunching outside my window, and I know deep down she's still looking for room 11. Back in 2011, I took a road trip from Dallas up to Denver. I wasn't in any kind of rush, so I decided to stay at cheap motels along the way rather than chain hotels. My budget was tight, and honestly, part of me liked the idea of authentic roadside America, quirky old motels with neon signs and stories buried in their walls. That romanticized idea ended the night I stopped at a 2-story place outside of Amarillo, Texas. Its sign read, High Plains Lodge, letters flickering with only 2 cars parked out front. Inside the lobby, the air smelled faintly of bleach and cigarette smoke. The man at the desk looked up from an old black and white TV, grunted, and handed me a key. No ID check, no credit card, just cash. The key was for room 14, upstairs at the end of the row. I remember the carpet on the stairs was so worn down in the middle that it felt like walking on bare wood. The room was plain but serviceable. Queen bed, mustard-colored curtains, a TV bolted to the dresser. The only thing I noticed right away was the vent above the bed. It was old, with a rusted grate, and it hummed faintly like something was still running behind it. The air coming out was cool even though the thermostat was off. After driving all day, I passed out fast. But sometime in the night, I woke to the faint sound of a voice. At first I thought it was someone outside, maybe a couple arguing in the parking lot. But as my ears adjusted, I realized the sound wasn't coming from outside at all. It was coming from the vent. I sat up in bed, heart thudding, and listened. The voice was soft, like a whisper, but too muffled to make out words. I leaned closer, straining to catch it. After a few moments, it grew clearer, like the person on the other side had moved closer too. "Help me," the voice whispered. I stumbled back, my whole body cold. It wasn't a scream or a moan, it was calm, almost conversational, like someone sitting right behind the wall, speaking directly to me. I told myself it had to be a prank. Maybe the walls were thin, and I was hearing another guest through the ductwork. But when I pressed my ear to the grate, I could hear something else. Breathing. Slow. Ragged. Too close. I shut off the light, crawled back into bed, and pulled the blanket over my head like a child. I must have drifted off at some point because the next thing I remember was waking again to the same voice. This time it was louder, clearer. "Room 14, it said. My room, my number. My blood went cold. I stayed awake until dawn, staring at the vent, waiting for another sound. Nothing came. In the morning when I checked out, I decided to casually mention it to the desk clerk, a younger guy, maybe the owner's son. I laughed nervously and said, "Hey, weird thing. I think someone's messing with the vents in room 14. I kept hearing a voice in there last night." The kid froze, his expression tightening. "You heard it?" His reaction made my stomach sink. "Heard what?" I asked carefully. He looked around the lobby, then lowered his voice. "There's no guest next to 14. The other room on that wall, room 15, has been locked up for years. We don't rent it out." I asked why, but he shook his head. "You don't want to know." That answer haunted me all day as I drove. I almost convinced myself he was screwing with me. But a week later, curiosity got the better of me, and I looked up High Plains Lodge Amarillo online. Buried in old news archives, I found it. In 1998, a man staying in room 15 had gone missing. Never checked out. Police found his belongings still inside: wallet, clothes, shoes. But no sign of him. The only clue they had was a neighbor's statement. She reported hearing his voice through the vent the night he vanished. Now, more than a decade later, I had heard the same thing. I still dream about that voice sometimes. Calm, quiet, always the same words. "Help me." And in the dream, I always walk closer to the vent. I always lean in. And I know one night, if I listen long enough, the voice will finally tell me where he went. Or worse, ask me to follow. In the summer of 2015, I was moving cross-country from Florida to Oregon. It was a long, lonely drive, and by the time I hit Oklahoma, I was exhausted and desperate for a place to crash. I pulled off the highway into a small town that looked like it hadn't changed in 50 years. One main street, a few boarded-up shops, and a neon sign glowing vacancy above a squat little motel. The sign read, Sunset Haven. The name sounded comforting, but the building itself gave me the opposite feeling. The lobby was lit by a single yellow bulb that flickered every few seconds. The woman at the desk looked half asleep, chain-smoking a cigarette while filling out a crossword puzzle. She barely looked at me when I asked for a room, just slid over a key attached to one of those plastic tags that said, Room 9. She didn't ask for ID, didn't ask how long I was staying. The whole exchange lasted less than 30 seconds, but something about her eyes stuck with me. Tired, yes, but also watchful. Like she wanted me gone quickly before I could ask questions. Room 9 was at the far end of the building. The door stuck when I pushed it open, and the smell hit me immediately. Not mildew exactly, but a kind of stale, heavy air, like no one had opened a window in years. I flicked on the light. The room was bare. One bed, a dresser, a TV that looked older than me, and a single lamp in the corner. But what I noticed almost immediately was the absence of something. There were no mirrors, not on the wall, not above the dresser, not in the bathroom. Nowhere. Every hotel room I'd ever stayed in had at least one mirror, usually more. This one didn't have a single reflective surface. I shrugged it off at first. Maybe they'd broken and hadn't been replaced. I was too tired to care. I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and fell asleep fully clothed. Somewhere around 3 a.m., I woke up with the strange, pressing sense that someone was watching me. My eyes adjusted to the dark, and that's when I noticed something that froze me. The TV screen, which had been off when I went to bed, was glowing faintly. Not showing static, not even turned on properly, just faintly glowing, like a black mirror catching the light from somewhere else. And in that faint glow, I saw a reflection. At first I thought it was just me, but when I sat up in bed, the reflection didn't move. It stayed lying down. I went cold all over. My first instinct was to grab my bag and leave, but something about the stillness of that reflection rooted me in place. I just sat there staring. Then it moved. Not quickly, not suddenly, but slowly, as if the person in the screen was waking up too. I watched as the other me rolled its head to the side and stared straight at me. That broke me. I lunged forward, yanked the cord out of the wall, and the screen went dark. No glow. No reflection. Just silence and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I didn't sleep again. I sat up until dawn, watching that blank TV, half expecting the screen to flicker back to life on its own. When I returned the key the next morning, I tried to joke about it to the clerk. I said, "Weirdest thing, but room 9 doesn't have any mirrors. Is that on purpose?" She didn't laugh. She didn't even smile. She just exhaled smoke and said flatly, "That room doesn't need mirrors." I asked her what she meant and she shook her head. "Don't worry about it. You won't be staying again." And she was right. I never did. But sometimes when I wake in the middle of the night and catch my reflection in the dark screen of my own TV, I remember the way that other version of me turned its head. And I wonder if, one night, it'll do more than just look. Back in 2012, I was driving from Denver to Phoenix to meet up with an old college friend. I had planned to do the trip in one go, but about halfway through, exhaustion caught up with me. My eyes were burning, my head nodding, and I knew if I pushed it any further, I'd risk falling asleep at the wheel. So I pulled off into a small desert town I'd never even heard of. It barely looked like a town at all, just a gas station, a diner, and one old 2-story motel sitting on the edge of the highway, like it had been forgotten there decades ago. The sign was so faded I could barely make out the name, but I figured a bed was a bed. The clerk at the front desk was a gaunt, sunburned man with yellowed eyes. He hardly spoke, just slid a guest book toward me, tapped the pen, and once I signed my name, he handed me a key on a heavy brass ring. The tag said, "Room 11. I was too tired to notice how strange his silence felt at the time, too focused on the thought of getting some rest. The room itself was nothing special. Scratchy carpet, buzzing fluorescent light, a window that faced the desert with curtains that didn't quite shut. But it was clean enough, and that was all I needed. I dropped onto the bed and let myself sink into it. It was maybe 2 hours later when I woke. Not because of a nightmare, but because of a sound. A steady, rhythmic thumping against the wall. At first I thought it might be pipes or maybe someone having sex in the room next door. But it didn't sound like that. It was too deliberate, too heavy. Like someone was slamming their hand, or their head, against the wall, over and over again. I pressed my ear to the wall. The sound was definitely coming from the room next door. I checked the room number painted on the doorframe earlier. It had been room 12. I told myself it wasn't my problem. People get drunk. People do weird stuff in motels. People fight. I climbed back into bed and tried to ignore it. But then came the whisper. It wasn't muffled like the thumping. It was clear. A voice, low, raspy, strained, slipping through the thin wall as though the person was speaking right into my ear. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught enough. "Help. Me." I froze. My chest felt like it was being crushed. I wanted to get up, to leave, but my legs wouldn't move. I stayed like that for what felt like forever, listening to the voice plead in broken fragments. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the sound stopped. Silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat up in bed, staring at the wall, waiting for it to start again. The next morning I went to check out. The clerk was still there, same blank face, same yellow eyes. I decided to bring it up casually, like maybe I hadn't heard right. I said, "Hey, is someone staying in room 12? They were making a lot of noise last night." He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me for a long moment and then he said, "Room 12's been locked for years, no one stays in there." I tried to laugh, but his face didn't change. He slid my receipt across the counter, and I got out of there as fast as I could. Later that day, when I stopped at a gas station outside town, curiosity got the better of me. I mentioned the motel to the attendant, described the faded sign, the sunburned clerk, and the room numbers. The attendant went pale. He said, "That place? It burned down in the late 90s. Took out half the top floor, including room 12. Killed a man inside who couldn't get out." I asked him when it was rebuilt. He shook his head. It wasn't. The building's been abandoned ever since. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I had stayed there just the night before, that I had the receipt in my pocket to prove it. But when I reached for it, the paper was gone. Just the empty fold of my wallet where I'd tucked it. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else has ever signed their name in that guest book, or if somehow I was the only one who ever checked in after midnight. I never used to believe in curses. Ghost stories, sure, they were entertaining, but I always chalked them up to people letting their imagination run wild. That changed in the spring of 2019 when a business trip had me driving through the empty back roads of New Mexico. The route was long, isolated, and by midnight my eyelids were heavy and my phone had no signal. When I saw the neon sign glowing faintly through the desert haze, I felt almost relieved. It was one of those roadside motels that looked like it had been stuck in the 1960s. Peeling paint, a row of identical doors, and a reception office with a flickering open sign. The place was called the Silver Star Inn. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and dust. A bell rang when I stepped up to the desk, and from the back came a man in a faded brown uniform. His hair was slicked down, his face pale and gaunt, but his smile was practiced, like it had been painted on years ago and never washed away. "Traveling alone?" he asked, his voice strangely formal, like he was rehearsing lines from a script. I nodded, and he handed me a brass key without asking for payment. The tag said room 6. I thought it odd, but I was too exhausted to argue. The room was plain. Single bed, old wallpaper with water stains, a chair pushed against the wall. What unsettled me wasn't the room itself, but the way the window curtains had already been drawn tight, as if someone knew I'd be arriving. I crawled under the covers anyway, convincing myself I was just tired and let sleep take me. But sometime during the night, I woke to the sound of someone unlocking the door. The metallic scrape of the key sliding into the knob was unmistakable. My body froze in place. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The door creaked open, and in the thin sliver of moonlight, I saw a shadow step inside. It was tall, unnaturally tall, its limbs too long. Its head bent as though it didn't quite fit inside the frame of the doorway. The shadow didn't move toward me. Instead, it went to the chair, the one pressed against the wall, and sat down. I could hear the wood strain beneath its weight. Then silence. I lay there for hours, paralyzed with fear, watching the dark shape sit in the corner, unmoving, until dawn broke and the room filled with light. And then, it was gone. Just the empty chair, no sign that anyone had ever been there. Shaking, I grabbed my bag and rushed to the front desk. The man was waiting there, that same hollow smile plastered on his face. Before I could say anything, he slid a guest book toward me. "Sign before you go," he said. I glanced down at the book, and my stomach twisted. The pages weren't filled with names and dates. They were filled with the same message, written over and over in hundreds of different handwritings. "Don't stay in room 6. I shoved the book back, stammering something about an emergency, and bolted. My car felt like a lifeline. I started the engine and didn't look back until I was miles away. But even then, in the rearview mirror, I swore I saw the silhouette of that long-limbed figure standing in the doorway of room 6, watching me leave. Here's the part that still keeps me up at night. A week later, back home, curiosity gnawed at me. I searched for the Silver Star Inn online. There was nothing. No listing, no reviews, not even a scrap of old history. I thought maybe I had the name wrong. I looked up abandoned motels along that route, and finally I found something, a newspaper clipping from 1972. The Silver Star Inn had burned down after a series of unexplained deaths. The article said the motel had been condemned and demolished decades ago. Room 6, according to the piece, was where they had found the body of the night clerk, hanging from the ceiling, his neck snapped, with a guest book clutched in his hands. I wanted to dismiss it as coincidence, as some strange dream I'd mistaken for memory. But when I opened my suitcase later that night, tucked between my clothes was a scrap of yellowed paper, brittle with age. It wasn't mine. I never packed it. On it, in a handwriting that wasn't my own, were 5 words. See you next check-in.
What if the place you checked into last night never actually existed? The question echoed like a ghost in Detective Laura Keene's mind as she squinted at the faded sign shimmering in the heat haze of the Mojave Desert. Black Hollow Motel Vacancy. The sign flickered, vacancy, as if hesitating to promise a place of the living. Laura had been driving for 14 hours straight, her government-issue SUV humming low as the asphalt stretched endlessly ahead. She wasn't supposed to be here. The case she was chasing had already gone cold 6 months ago, a string of missing persons along Route 117. Couples, solo travelers, truckers. No pattern, no motive, just gone. Until last week, when a bloody cell phone was found buried in the sand near this very highway. The last photo on it showed something strange, an old motel neon sign, glowing red, half buried by dunes. The same one now standing before her. She parked, cut the engine, and let the silence swallow her. The desert air was thick and unmoving. Even the wind seemed afraid to speak here. The Black Hollow Motel looked like it hadn't had a guest since the 1980s. 12 rooms, all lined in a U-shape around a dry swimming pool. Dust coated the windows like frost. A rusty ice machine leaned to one side, frozen in time. A bell jingled softly as Laura pushed open the lobby door. The smell hit her, something between old carpet and mildew. The desk was empty, except for a cracked register book. Then, "Be right with you," a voice called from the back. A man appeared, a little too suddenly. Late 50s, wiry, with eyes too bright for the desert. His name tag read Carl. "Evening, ma'am. You look like you've been on the road for a while," he said, smiling in that small-town way that didn't reach his eyes. "Near room?" Laura hesitated. Her instincts, the ones honed over years of detective work, screamed no, but fatigue pressed harder. "Just for the night," she said. "Do you get many guests out here?" Carl chuckled, scribbling on a paper form. "Not these days. Used to, back when the main highway ran through. People like to drive fast now. Skip the scenery." Laura signed her name in the guest log and froze. The previous entry was dated April 12th, 2022, 6 months ago. The same week the last couple disappeared. Her pen hovered. Carl was watching her. "Everything all right?" he asked. She forced a nod. "Yeah, long drive." He handed her an old brass key, room 9, and gave directions with a thin smile. "End of the lot. Don't mind the lights. They flicker sometimes. Old wiring." As she turned to leave, he added, almost casually, "Don't go outside after midnight. The desert's not kind to strangers." Room 9 creaked open like it was waking from a long sleep. Inside, the air was stale but cool. Floral curtains, stained carpet, a TV from another century. She set her bag down, unbuttoned her coat, and glanced around. The phone on the nightstand caught her attention. It was an old rotary model, the kind you rarely saw anymore. Its cord was cut clean through. Weird. She sat on the bed, jotting notes into her case file. Location, Black Hollow Motel. Possible connection to Route 117 disappearances. Clerk Carl, potentially withholding info. Her head throbbed. The silence pressed in until it became sound itself, a low hum, vibrating through the floor. The TV flickered on by itself. A blank gray screen. No signal, but faintly in the static. She could swear she saw a shadow moving. She got up, heart pounding, and pulled the plug. The screen went dark, but the faint hum continued. That's when she noticed it. The bathroom door slightly ajar. A slow drip echoed inside. She stepped closer. The mirror over the sink was cracked down the middle, splitting her reflection in two. The drip came from the bathtub faucet. She reached out to twist it tight and froze. There was something etched into the porcelain of the tub, faint like fingernail scratches. "Help me. Room 9. Her breath caught. She blinked, leaned closer. The letters were fresh. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, making her flinch. No signal, just static, then a faint whisper through the speaker. "Get out before it finds you." She backed away. Hello? Who is this? No response. Just that same broken whisper. Room 9, you're not the first. She dropped the phone, heart racing. The whisper had come from inside the room. She turned toward the TV, still unplugged, now faintly glowing again. The gray static shimmered and shaped itself into something like a face, half-formed and screaming silently behind glass. Then the screen went black. Laura stormed back to the lobby, slamming the bell. No answer. The hallway behind the desk was dark, though she could hear faint movement. Something dragging, soft and wet, across the linoleum. "Carl," she called out. No reply. She moved behind the counter. The register was open. Dusty guest books lined the shelves below it. She pulled the oldest one out and flipped through, page after page of names, until she noticed something strange. Every guest who had stayed in room 9 had a small cross drawn next to their name. Some were circled in red ink. Some had been crossed out entirely. And then she found it. April 12th, 2022, the last recorded stay. Tom and Evelyn Moore, room 9. A note beneath it, scrawled in different handwriting. Do not rent again. Contaminated. The sound of a door creaking made her whip around. A dark shape stood at the far end of the hallway. It wasn't Carl. The figure tilted its head slightly. Its outline was human, but wrong, as if the joints bent backward. The light flickered, and it was gone. Laura drew her gun, breath trembling. Show yourself. Silence. Then a voice right behind her. You shouldn't have come back. She spun empty air. The front door swung open on its own, the desert wind rushing in. She bolted outside, scanning the lot. Every door of the motel was wide open now. All 11, except hers. Room 9's door was shut tight, and from inside it came the faint sound of running water, and someone softly crying. The desert at night felt like a living thing. It didn't move, yet it pulsed, a low, invisible heartbeat vibrating beneath the ground. The heat of the day had drained into the earth, leaving behind an eerie stillness, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Detective Laura Keene stood in that silence, staring at the dark row of motel doors swaying in the wind. 11 rooms stood open, black and hollow like ice sockets of a skull. But room 9, her room, was still closed. The sound of water dripping from inside carried faintly through the air, mingling with something else, a woman's muffled sob. Laura's hand tightened around her gun. Every instinct screamed to get back in her SUV and drive until the headlights touched a real town, but her mind, her detective's mind, whispered something else. The answers are in there. Whatever happened to the missing people, whatever this place really was, the key was behind that door. She stepped forward, boots crunching over gravel, her shadow long and trembling under the flickering neon. As she reached the door, she noticed something she hadn't before. The brass number 9 wasn't bolted in like the others. It looked newer, polished, as if someone had replaced it recently. She reached for the doorknob, but the moment her fingers brushed it, a static jolt shot through her body, like touching a live wire. She yanked her hand back with a hiss. The knob was ice cold, colder than the desert night should allow. She tried again, wrapping her sleeve around her hand this time, and turned it slowly. The door creaked open. The sound of water was louder now, echoing from the bathroom. She stepped inside. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied into a dim, sickly yellow glow. The air smelled faintly metallic, blood, or something close to it. The curtains rippled though the window was closed. On the bed lay her phone, screen-lit, still showing the missed call from unknown. The message it had whispered earlier still echoed in her skull. Get out before it finds you. She forced herself toward the bathroom. Hello, she called. This is Detective Keene. Is someone in there? The crying stopped. Her pulse hammered in her throat as she nudged the door open with the barrel of her gun. The room beyond was empty. No woman, no intruder. Just a cracked mirror and the old clawfoot tub filled with several inches of dark water. The faint reflection of her flashlight shimmered on the surface. But the water wasn't rippling from her movement. It was pulsing, expanding and contracting like a heartbeat. Then she saw it. Something floated just beneath the surface. Pale skin, hair drifting slowly like seaweed. She dropped to one knee, reached forward, and the figure vanished. The water went still again, perfectly flat. Her reflection returned, fractured by the crack in the mirror. She was alone, except she wasn't, because in that fractured reflection behind her shoulder stood a man, blurred, almost transparent, his face twisted with silent rage. Before she could turn, the lights exploded, plunging the room into darkness. The gun went up instantly, her breath ragged, every nerve in her body screaming. She swept the flashlight across the room. Nothing, just peeling wallpaper and her own trembling hand. The motel had gone dead silent again. No hum, no crying, no dripping water. Then came the voice, faint, low, right beside her ear. He never left, you know. Laura spun around, flashlight slicing through the dark. Empty space. But the words lingered, whispering from somewhere deep in the walls. She backed into main room, her heartbeat deafening. The air had grown colder. A soft thump echoed from outside, then another, closer. She moved to the window, peeled back the curtain, and saw something in the parking lot. A figure standing by the pool, motionless, looking straight up at her window. The pale glow of the sign flickered overhead, and for a split second, she could see its face. It was Carl, the motel clerk, but his expression was wrong. His eyes were wide, glassy, and his mouth hung open as though trying to form a scream that would never come. He raised one trembling arm and pointed directly at her window. Then he collapsed. Laura rushed out the door, her boots hitting the gravel hard. "Carl!" she shouted, running across the lot. The neon sign buzzed above her head, casting bloody light across the cracked pavement. The pool's water shimmered in the dark, too still, too reflective. When she reached Carl's body, she dropped to her knees, checked his pulse. Nothing. His skin was cold, impossibly cold, like he'd been lying there for hours, not minutes. But she'd just seen him standing, alive, seconds ago. His throat bore strange marks, not bruises, but deep impressions, like the grip of a hand with too many fingers. Something brushed against her neck. She froze, slowly looked up, and saw ripples spreading across the surface of the pool. A shape was moving beneath the water. It was massive. The ripples quickened. A faint bubbling sound rose to a hiss. Then something broke the surface. Not a person. Not quite. A figure, pale and bloated, its mouth gaping open, eyes white and unseeing. Another followed, then another, until the pool was alive with silent, writhing bodies pressing against the water's surface like insects trapped beneath glass. Each face was different, but each looked familiar. She recognized them from the case files. Every missing traveler from Route 117. She stumbled back, trembling. Carl's body twitched beside her. His head jerked once, then his mouth opened, too wide, and water began pouring from it, gallons of dark, murky water spilling onto the ground, forming a small stream that ran toward her boots. Laura screamed, stepping back, but the water was following her. It pooled around her feet, rising fast, reflecting the flickering neon like liquid fire. Then she heard a woman's voice again, whispering from somewhere beneath the surface. "You opened the door, Laura. Now it knows you." Her SUV keys jingled in her hand as she turned and ran. She didn't look back. The motel loomed behind her, glowing red in the dark. The sign flickering between vacancy and a no vacancy, like it couldn't decide which was true. She slammed the car door, twisted the key. The engine sputtered once, twice, then died. The headlights flickered on by themselves, illuminating the motel's main office. Someone was standing inside. The shape was human, but tall, impossibly tall, its head brushing the ceiling. It turned slowly, revealing hollow sockets where eyes should have been. In its hand, it held something shiny. A motel key. Room 9. The engine roared to life suddenly, screaming louder than she'd ever heard it before. She threw the car into reverse, tires screeching against the dirt, and tore down the highway. The desert swallowed her, mile after mile, until the motel disappeared behind a curtain of darkness. Only when she was 30 miles away did she finally stop, chest heaving, staring into the endless night. She opened her phone, no signal. But a new photo had appeared in her gallery, one she hadn't taken. It showed her asleep in room 9, and in the reflection of the TV screen, beside her bed, the tall, eyeless figure standing in the corner, watching her. The desert swallowed her taillights as she drove, but the motel refused to vanish from her mind. Every mile of that empty highway felt like she was being watched, as though something invisible ran parallel to her car just beyond the headlights' reach. She'd escaped, at least that's what logic tried to tell her. Yet logic had no power here. Not after what she saw rise from that pool. Not after seeing her own sleeping face in a photo she never took. When dawn finally crept across the horizon, washing the desert in dull gray light, she pulled over by an abandoned gas station, hands trembling on the wheel. She had to breathe, think, remember who she was. Detective Laura Keene, Los Angeles Missing Persons Division. She wasn't supposed to lose her grip like this, but her training had never prepared her for something that watched back. She stepped out of the SUV, leaning against the hood, trying to slow her pulse. The morning air was cold and dry. Her boots crunched over gravel as she walked toward the gas station's faded building. Windows shattered, a tattered flag flapping above the door. Maybe she could find a working phone, or at least some trace of civilization. But as she approached, she froze. There, on the side of the building, was a poster, weathered, nearly bleached white from sun exposure, but the words were still legible. Missing couple, last seen near Black Hollow Motel. Tom and Evelyn Moore. Their faces stared back at her, smiling in the photo. They looked young, happy, frozen in a moment of innocence before the desert swallowed them. She ran her fingers over the paper. Someone had pinned a small note beneath it, written in faded red ink. If you find this, don't go back there. The rooms remember. She turned away, but something in the window caught her eye. A faint reflection of her own face distorted. For a split second, her reflection smiled back before she did. She stumbled backward, heart racing, then caught herself. Maybe she was hallucinating from exhaustion. Maybe she got back into the SUV and tried the radio, hoping for static, music, anything. After a few minutes of silence, a voice broke through, low, faint, almost drowned by white noise. You left something behind, Detective. Her hand froze on the dial. Who is this? She demanded, leaning closer. Room 9 misses you. And then the transmission died. She sat there, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles went white. That was impossible. No one could have known where she'd been or what she'd seen. Unless she never really left. When she finally made it to the nearest town, Dust Ridge, population barely a few hundred, it was already midday. The sun baked the streets, the heat shimmering over old gas pumps and rusting signs. She parked outside a diner called Sally's, hoping for coffee and a working phone line. The place was nearly empty. A waitress with kind eyes and deep wrinkles looked up from behind the counter. You look like you've seen a ghost, sweetheart, the woman said with a soft chuckle. Laura forced a smile. You could say that. I'm looking into some disappearances. Route 117. You ever hear of a place called Black Hollow Motel? The woman's expression froze mid-laugh. The air seemed to thicken. For a moment, no one in the diner moved. Then the waitress leaned forward, voice low. I thought they tore that place down years ago. Laura frowned. It's still there. I stayed there last night. The woman shook her head slowly, whispering more to herself than to Laura. Honey, that motel burned down in 1999. There were people inside. They never found all the bodies. The coffee in Laura's cup rippled as her hand trembled. That's not possible. I talked to the manager. Carl. He was there. The waitress went pale. Carl? Carl Hutchins? Ma'am, he was one of the people who died in that fire. Laura didn't answer. Her stomach turned, her mind spinning. She had seen him, spoken to him. His name had been on the tag. There was no mistaking it. Do you have any records of that fire? She asked finally. The woman hesitated, then nodded toward the corner of the diner where a small corkboard hung, cluttered with local news clippings. Laura stood and scanned the yellowed papers until one headline stopped her cold. Black Hollow Motel Tragedy. Owner found dead in basement with guests. She tore the clipping down and read the article. It mentioned 12 victims. The owner, Carl Hutchins, was found dead in the basement along with several guests. The fire had started near the electrical panel. Though the cause was never determined, most of the bodies were unidentifiable, and strange symbols were reportedly found burned into the basement walls. Laura folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket. Her hands shook. None of this made sense. She'd seen the motel intact. She'd stayed in room 9. But if the motel had burned down 25 years ago, then what had she just walked into? She thanked the waitress, left cash on the counter, and walked out into the blazing sun. The town sheriff station was just across the street, a squat brick building with a faded flag fluttering in the heat. Inside, she met Sheriff Dan Holden, a broad man in his 50s with skeptical eyes. When she told him her story, he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You're saying you stayed at a place that burned down in '99? You sure you weren't at some other motel?" "I'm sure," Laura said. "I have photos. Evidence." She showed him the image on her phone, the one that had appeared on its own. But now the screen was blank. The gallery was empty. Every photo, every video, gone. Holden sighed. "Look, I don't know what's going on here, but if you're dead set on chasing ghosts, we've still got the case files from the fire and archives. Basement storage." They descended the creaking stairs into the dimly lit basement. Rows of old cardboard boxes filled the shelves. Holden found one labeled Black Hollow 99. Inside were photos, scorched motel keys, melted fragment of signage, and a single VHS tape sealed in an evidence bag. Written across it in fading black marker were the words, "Security footage, night of fire." Holden frowned. "We never managed to play this thing. Tape's damaged, and the old player died years ago." "I can fix it," Laura said. "Please, I need to see what's on it." After some hesitation, he handed her the bag. "Be careful, detective. Sometimes the dead don't like being watched." Back in her motel room in Dust Ridge, she set up her laptop and borrowed a VHS converter from a local thrift store. The tape hissed and stuttered as it started to play. Static. Then a grainy image of the Black Hollow Motel lobby appeared on screen. Carl Hutchins stood behind the desk, smiling at the camera. A woman walked in, her features fuzzy, distorted by tape degradation. But her posture, her haircut, even the way she carried herself, Laura froze. It was her. She watched herself walk to the counter, sign the book, take the key for room 9. Then the video cut to static again before flickering back on, this time showing the motel engulfed in flames. People running, screaming. Carl turning toward the camera, mouth moving as if shouting something. Then darkness. She rewound the tape, squinting at the final frames. There, in the last second before the screen went black, she saw it, a reflection in the motel window. The same tall, eyeless figure from before, standing behind Carl, one hand on his shoulder. Her heart pounded. If that footage was real, then somehow she'd been recorded on a tape from 25 years ago. She leaned closer to the screen, and the TV flickered once more. This time, the grainy image was live. The timestamp read tonight's date. The camera panned slowly down a dim corridor, the Black Hollow Motel's hallway. It stopped at a door. Room 9. The doorknob turned by itself. And from the speakers, faint and distorted, came her own voice, whispering. "You shouldn't have watched it, Laura." The desert night stretched endlessly as Detective Laura Keene sat frozen in front of the flickering TV. The tape's image, the live feed, refused to vanish, no matter how many times she pressed the power button. Her trembling fingers unplugged the converter, yanked the cords from the wall, but the static continued to dance across the dark screen, as if powered by something that didn't need electricity at all. The timestamp still read 11:42 p.m., tonight's date. The faint hum of the recording filled the room, like breathing. Then, just for a heartbeat, the image shifted. The camera's view trembled, zooming closer to that old wooden door marked 9. The knob turned again, slowly this time, like whatever stood behind it wasn't trying to open it, but remembering how. Laura stared until a reflection in the dark glass seemed to waver, merging with the footage itself. Her reflection blinked once, then twice, then stopped blinking altogether while she still did. A surge of fear ripped through her chest. She tore the plug out of the wall and stumbled back, panting. No, this isn't real. But the words sounded hollow, because deep down, she wasn't sure what real meant anymore. Sleep was impossible that night. Every sound, the creak of the motel pipes, the low wind scraping sand against the window, felt like something moving closer. When dawn finally arrived, gray and weak, Laura knew what she had to do. Logic had abandoned her somewhere between the highway and that cursed pool, but one thing remained clear. She couldn't leave this unresolved. She couldn't let that thing, whatever it was, keep claiming people. So she went back. The drive back to the Black Hollow Motel was silent, except for the hum of the engine and the dry hiss of the wind. The desert felt emptier than before, like even the animals had learned to avoid this stretch of land. When she finally crested the last hill, the motel came into view. Its sign, Black Hollow Motel, vacancy, still flickered faintly, fighting to stay alive against the daylight. But something was different. The air shimmered around the building, the horizon behind it bending slightly, as if the heat was warping more than light. It was warping reality itself. Laura parked near the entrance and stepped out, her boots crunching on the cracked pavement. The silence was total again. Even the buzz of flies was gone. She half expected the front door to be locked, but opened easily, the faint jingle of the bell echoing too loudly through the empty lobby. The front desk looked untouched, as though no time had passed. The register book still lay open, the last signature still hers. But as she turned the page, she noticed something chilling. The ink from her own name had begun to bleed, spreading across the paper like veins. It pulsed faintly under the light, as if alive. Her flashlight beam swept the counter. The dust was undisturbed except for one thing. A set of old motel keys laid neatly in a row. Room 1 through room 9. The rest were missing, and the key for room 9 was damp. She picked it up, hesitating. Her reflection in the metal tag rippled faintly, not quite matching her movements. "Carl," she called, voice steady though her heart was anything but. "I know you're here. I know what you did." The air shifted. A faint scratching noise came from behind the counter. Laura rounded it cautiously, gun drawn, flashlight cutting across the floor. There was a trapdoor, wooden, bolted down with rusted hinges. The scratching grew louder, faster, like something was trying to claw its way out. Her pulse hammered as she knelt and brushed the dust from the wood. Faded letters were carved into the surface. She leaned closer to read them. "It waits below." The hinges shrieked as she pulled the door open. The smell hit her first, wet metallic, old. A set of stairs descended into darkness, the kind of black that seemed to drink in light. She took a deep breath. "You want to be found," she whispered, and started down. Each step groaned under her weight. The deeper she went, the colder the air became, until her breath fogged in front of her. The walls were concrete, but they pulsed faintly, damp to the touch, as though the building itself was alive. When she reached the bottom, her flashlight beam caught something. Shelves lined with old VHS tapes, hundreds of them, stacked floor to ceiling. Each one was labeled with a date and a name. She stepped closer, reading them one by one. Tom and Evelyn Moore, April 12th, 22. Sergeant Daniel Owens, August 19th, 18. Rebecca Hall, March 2nd, 16. Every missing person from Route 117 had a tape, and then she found one with her own name on it. Laura Keene, October 15th, 24. Her throat tightened. That's impossible. The shelves ended at a small table against the far wall. On it sat an old TV set, still powered somehow, its screen glowing dim blue. A single tape was already inside the player, the label long since worn off. Without thinking, she pressed play. Static filled the room. Then an image appeared. A man's face, close to the lens, his expression desperate. "My name's Carl Hutchins," he whispered. "If you're watching this, it means you found the tapes. It means it's too late for you, too." He looked over his shoulder, eyes wide. "It feeds on us, on our memories. Every guest who checks in, it keeps them here. Not their bodies, their moments. It records them, plays them back, forever. It wants to be remembered. Something heavy thudded off camera. Carl flinched. You can't destroy it. You can't even leave. You'll think you did, but you'll end up right back here. This place isn't in the desert. It's between. Then the feed cut to static again, but a faint shape lingered, tall, eyeless, stepping into frame. Carl's scream was the last sound before the tape went dead. Laura stood frozen. Between what? She wanted to ask. Between worlds? Between life and death? The air grew colder. The static on the TV shifted again, and a live image replaced the recording, grainy, colorless. It showed her standing there in the basement, exactly as she was now. Her flashlight flickered. The camera on the screen began to move closer. She looked around, heart hammering. There was no visible camera in the room, no equipment, yet the image zoomed in, slowly closing in on her face. Her reflection on the screen tilted its head, but she didn't move. Then from behind her, a voice spoke softly, almost kind. It's been waiting for you, Laura. She spun around. There, standing at the foot of the stairs, was Carl, but his face was wrong. Half burned, one eye melted into a hollow socket, the other filled with flickering static. His clothes hung in tatters, his hands slick with something dark. You shouldn't have come back, he said, his voice a blend of echo and static. It's hungry again. She raised her gun, but her hands shook. What is it? What's here? Carl smiled, a broken, sorrowful thing. The room, the recordings, the hollow itself. You saw the tapes. It keeps time, not people. He stepped closer, his burned hand reaching toward her. You're already part of it. Laura pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the basement, deafening in the small space. Carl's body jerked, but instead of blood, static spilled from the wound, swirling like smoke. His form shimmered, collapsing into a wave of flickering light that sank into the floor. The TV screamed. High-pitched static filled the air until she dropped to her knees, covering her ears. The shelves rattled. The tapes began to fall, one after another, breaking open and spilling their black ribbons across the floor like veins. The silence after the scream was thicker than darkness itself. It felt as though the basement had swallowed every trace of sound and left Laura alone inside a vacuum where even breathing seemed foreign. The smell of ozone hung in the air, burned metal, scorched dust, and something older like damp stone. The floor beneath her palms was no longer concrete. It felt soft, uneven, pulsing faintly under her touch as if she were kneeling on a giant's vein. Her flashlight, knocked aside by the blast of static, rolled until its beam landed on a single object lying amid the spilled film reels. The key to room 9. It gleamed wetly in the dim light, though she could see no source of moisture. When she reached for it, the air turned cold enough to make her fingers ache. The metal burned her skin like ice. For a moment she considered dropping it, but a voice whispered, so faint she couldn't tell if it came from the room or from inside her skull. You'll need it to leave. She pocketed the key and forced herself toward the stairs. Each step groaned as if the building were aware of her climb. Halfway up, she noticed something wrong. There were more steps than before. The stairs twisted subtly, stretching, folding back on themselves. It took her almost a minute to reach the door at the top, and when she pushed it open, daylight flooded her eyes, too bright, almost artificial. The lobby above was different. It was cleaner now, the walls freshly painted, the carpet new, the desk bell gleamed. Outside the front windows, cars glided along a distant highway that hadn't existed before. For an instant she thought she'd somehow escaped, that she'd stepped forward in time to a renovated version of the motel. But the air was wrong. The light had no warmth. It came from nowhere, casting shadows that didn't match their owners. The front door swung open, and a man stepped inside, carrying a suitcase. He nodded politely at her. Afternoon. You folks have a vacancy. Her mouth went dry. Don't stay here, she said. Please, turn around and leave. The man frowned, confused. Is something wrong, ma'am? Before she could answer, another sound filled the air. A bright chime as a neon sign outside flicked on by itself. Through the window, she read the words glowing blood red against the white daylight. Black Hollow Motel vacancy. The man smiled. Guess that's my sign. He turned to the counter and rang the bell. Laura grabbed his arm. Listen to me. This place isn't real. You need to get back in your car. But the man's face had already started to blur, features softening like melting wax. He didn't seem to notice. Can I get room 9? Looks quiet. Her stomach turned to stone. The bell on the counter rang again, though neither of them had touched it. From the back office came the familiar voice of Carl, cheerful and oblivious. Be right with you. Laura stumbled backward. No, you're gone. Carl appeared exactly as he had the first night. Unburned, smiling, eyes bright and empty. Detective Keene, good to see you again. Forgot something last time, did you? She shook her head, gripping the gun she'd somehow retrieved from its holster without realizing it. You're dead, Carl. You burn in that fire. You can't be standing here. He chuckled, tilting his head. Fire? Oh, that's just a story we tell new guests. Adds character. His smile widened until it cut across his cheeks too far. Why don't you take the same room? Room 9's open just for you. The word struck her like a physical blow. The new guest, if he was real, took the key Carl offered and headed down the corridor. Laura's voice cracked. Don't go in there. The man didn't react. He walked away until the light swallowed him at the far end. The hallway shimmered, then folded inward like a collapsing mirror, sealing behind him. Carl leaned over the counter, lowering his voice to a whisper. You see, it can't let go of you now. The hollow remembers every guest who tries to leave. He straightened, the cheer returning. We just reopen whenever we need more stories. Laura's breath came fast and shallow. The edges of the room rippled as though reality itself were breathing. She stumbled toward the front door, but when she threw it open, there was no desert outside. Only darkness, a void stretching forever. The wind howled from somewhere beneath her feet, carrying whispers that sounded like her own name. She slammed the door shut, chest heaving, and turned back toward the lobby. It was empty again. The new guest, Carl, even the bright daylight, all gone. The walls had returned to their former decay, wallpaper peeling, dust hanging thick. Only the room 9 key in her pocket proved that anything had changed. She pulled it out and stared at the tarnished metal. The tag was different now. On one side was a usual number. On the other, etched deep as if carved by fingernails, were 3 words. Don't open it. But she could already hear the door unlocking in her mind. The soft click of the latch turning. The slow exhale of something that had been waiting too long. A wave of dizziness hit her. She sank to her knees. The air smelled of smoke again, of ash and wet concrete. When she looked up, the corridor to rooms had reappeared, stretching away like a throat lined with open doors. Each door led to darkness, except for one at the very end, faintly glowing from within. Room 9. Her phone buzzed suddenly in her pocket, startling her. She pulled it out. No signal, but a text message glowed on the cracked screen. From unknown. If you close it, they'll never escape. She typed back before she could think. Who are you? The reply came instantly. The first one who opened it. The floor trembled beneath her knees. The ceiling lights flickered, casting shadows that moved independently from their owners. She rose, clutching the keys so tightly it dug into her palm, and took a single step toward the hallway. The carpet felt damp. Another step, and the smell of decay grew stronger. Each door she passed whispered faintly, voices bleeding through the wood, murmurs of trapped conversations, laughter, sobbing, prayers. She couldn't tell if they were memories or warnings. Halfway down the corridor, she noticed photographs nailed to the walls. Old Polaroid of smiling guests, each one gradually overexposed until only white silhouettes remained. The final photo at the end of the hallway showed her, standing before room 9, eyes hollow, mouth open in a silent scream. The knob turned once, slowly, without her touching it. The door creaked open a fraction, releasing a breath of icy air that smelled of burnt film and salt. Something moved beyond the threshold, just a shadow, or maybe a reflection. Laura whispered to herself, "Don't open it." But the door was already swinging wider. From inside came a voice that was undeniably her own, calm and distant, as though recorded years ago. You already did. The hallway lights burst all at once, plunging everything into blackness. The darkness on the other side of room 9 was an absence of light. It was a presence, thick, tactile, almost oily. When Laura stepped forward, it clung to her skin like cold smoke. The door closed behind her with a sigh that felt less mechanical than organic, as though lungs somewhere deep in the walls had exhaled. Her flashlight spat out a weak cone of light, but the beam seemed to die just a few feet ahead, swallowed whole by the black. She called out, voice trembling, "This is Detective Keene. If anyone's here, answer me." The words slid away, muffled, then came back seconds later, warped and lower-pitched, as if someone had repeated them from far beneath her feet. She forced herself to move. The carpet under her boots turned from threadbare fabric to damp cement, and the walls narrowed until her shoulders brushed both sides. The air smelled of dust, rot, and something chemical. Film developer fluid, maybe, or burned plastic. Every few steps she caught flashes in the beam. Framed photographs hanging crooked, their glass cracked. Each one showed the same empty hallway from a slightly different angle, and in every frame, the perspective crept closer to where she stood now. By the last picture, she could see the back of her own head. Her breath stuttered. The camera that had taken those pictures had been following her before she entered, or maybe the corridor had been watching itself. A faint hum began somewhere behind the walls, low at first, like the vibration of machinery starting up. Then the sound deepened until it carried a rhythm, an almost heartbeat-like thump. The light above flickered, revealing a staircase descending directly in the middle of the room, though she could swear the floor had been solid a moment earlier. A thin mist rolled up from below, carrying a chill that gnawed at her bones. She wanted to run, to slam the door and drive until sunrise, but the detective in her, the part that still believed answers existed, made her grip the rail and start down. The steps spiraled endlessly. The hum grew louder until it became a chorus of whispers overlapping in languages she didn't know. The farther she descended, the more the whispers formed words she did understand. Her own name, repeated by dozens of unseen mouths. The stairwell opened into a cavernous space lit by the weak flicker of old film projectors. Their reels spun, casting moving images on the curved concrete walls. Laura turned in a slow circle. Each projector played a different scene. Families eating dinner in motel rooms, couples laughing in bed, truckers watching television. All moments of ordinary life. But the images didn't loop normally. They decayed, melted, reversed, then played again, as if the film itself refused to die. Then she saw them. Dozens of figures stood in the shadows between the screens. At first she thought they were mannequins, posed in the still light, but when her beam crossed one, it flinched away. They were human, or had been once. Their skin was pale, translucent, their eyes milky white. Some clutched Polaroids to their chests. Others simply stared at the projections of their own former lives. When she whispered, "Who are you?" one of them turned its head, the motion jerky, like film skipping frames. A woman's voice drifted out, weak but articulate. "Guess." We stayed. We watched. Laura's pulse hammered. "How long have you been here?" The woman's cracked lips formed a smile that wasn't relief but resignation. "Until the reel ends." "It never ends." She raised a trembling hand and pointed to the largest projector at the far wall. "That one's yours." Laura followed the gesture. The screen showed a grainy image of her walking into the motel lobby, signing the register, talking to Carl. Every moment she'd lived since arriving was being replayed there, seconds behind real time. And on the film's edge, almost hidden in the flicker, loomed the tall, eyeless figure, always just behind her, following from scene to scene. She turned off her flashlight, half hoping the darkness would swallow the images. But the projectors kept glowing. The whispering crowd shuffled closer, their bare feet dragging against the floor. She raised her gun. "Stay back." They froze, then as one, lifted their heads toward the ceiling. The humming deepened into a roar that made the floor vibrate. The projectors dimmed, and a huge crack split the far wall. From it poured black water, thick as oil, spreading fast across the floor. The spectral guests didn't flee. They stepped calmly into it. sinking without resistance, their forms dissolving as though welcoming an old friend. The water stopped at Laura's boots. Quivering, she took a step backward, but the key in her pocket pulsed warm, almost alive. A new whisper emerged, not from the room but from inside her own mind. If you leave them, it will follow you again. The logic was insane, but logic had died long ago. She crouched, staring at the black water. Her reflection stared back, and beside it, another shape, taller, faceless, waiting. It didn't attack. It simply extended a hand toward her reflection, inviting. Her chest tightened. "What do you want?" she demanded. The voice answered from everywhere and nowhere, smooth and hollow. A witness. Every story needs one. The projectors blinked out, plunging the cavern into total darkness. The next sound was a click of a reel restarting somewhere behind her, followed by faint footsteps, wet, deliberate, approaching. She raised her gun again, though she already knew bullets wouldn't matter here. The footsteps stopped just beyond reach. She could feel it breathing, cold air grazing her cheek. Then came a whisper, soft and now almost tender. "You open the door. Now open the rest." The floor gave way beneath her. She plunged into freezing black water, the light above ceiling as the stairwell collapsed. Her lungs burned as she sank, arms flailing, eyes open in the murk. Shapes moved beside her, those same pale guests, drifting peacefully downward. The current twisted, pulling her toward a faint golden glow below. She realized it wasn't light at all but fire, flickering far beneath, illuminating the ruins of another building submerged under layers of time. The original Black Hollow Motel, its rooms still intact, burning silently underwater. Her fingers brushed the handle of a door drifting by. Room 9's door, torn from its hinges. She grabbed it to steady herself, but the instant she touched it, the world shifted again. The water vanished. She was standing, drenched, in the motel parking lot under a moonless sky. The neon sign buzzed weakly above her, its letters half-lit. BLA Hall MTEL. Smoke curled from the building's windows. Somewhere inside, a man screamed. Laura staggered forward, coughing, the weight of the key heavy in her palm. Her watch was gone. The horizon showed no hint of dawn, just endless night. Behind her, the desert stretched in every direction, but the highway had disappeared. The only road led back toward the motel. She whispered to no one, "What year is it?" And from the dark doorway, Carl's burned voice answered, calm and almost relieved. "Still the night of the fire, detective. You just arrived." Heat rolled across the parking lot in waves that shimmered like mirages, yet the air itself remained cold, sharp enough to sting her lungs. The building burned without sound. Orange light pulsed behind cracked windows, licking at curtains that refused to crumble. Laura stood frozen halfway between the lot and the lobby, water dripping from her hair, her badge catching the light like a coin at the bottom of a river. The smell was all wrong. No smoke, no char, just ozone and wet concrete. It felt less like fire and more like time itself smoldering. From the open doorway, Carl's silhouette wavered, half ash, half flesh. The same voice that had greeted her on her first night emerged now through the roar of flames, oddly polite. "You wanted to see the truth, detective. Every investigation ends with reconstruction, doesn't it?" She raised a pistol that had somehow followed her to the flood, though the metal steamed in the heat. "What is this?" The words scraped her throat. "Where are we?" Carl stepped into the light. His features shifted from the kindly clerk she remembered to the burned mask she'd seen in the basement, and back again, flickering frame by frame. "We are in the film," he said simply. "The night everything began. It replays itself for anyone who refuses to forget." He tilted his head, the skin of his neck crackling like paper. "You wanted to solve the disappearances. You're standing in the moment that created them." Behind him, a woman screamed. Laura's instincts surged. She sprinted past him into the lobby. The interior looked intact for a heartbeat. Carpet clean, furniture upright, before the illusion fractured and smoke poured from the walls. Guests ran to the corridor, faces blurred by motion, clutching suitcases, photographs, each one trying doors that melted into the plaster before their hands could grasp the knobs. The ceiling lights exploded one after another, and the wallpaper curled inward, revealing film reels running inside the walls like veins. The building wasn't burning. It was developing. She grabbed the nearest fleeing man by the shoulders. His skin was hot but dry, eyes wide with confusion. "How did it start?" she shouted. "What caused the fire?" He blinked, and the pupils of his eyes spun like reels. "She opened it," he whispered. She wanted the moment to last forever. Then he was gone, simply gone, leaving behind a shadow scorched onto the floor. The word struck her like a blow. She opened it. Laura turned toward the hallway, leading to room 9. Even through the rising smoke, she could see it. Door half ajar, golden light spilling out. Something behind it moved rhythmically, almost breathing. Each pulse sent a ripple through the burning walls. She moved toward it, step by careful step, while Carl's voice followed her like an echo from past. "Before the fire," he said, appearing at her side, though she hadn't heard him approach. There was a guest who brought a camera. She filmed everything: sunsets, insects on the glass, her husband sleeping. She said the world moved too fast. That film could trap what life forgot. When she asked to see the basement, I told her no, but she found the door anyway. Laura's throat tightened. Evelyn Moore. Carl nodded slowly. She believed every picture was a small resurrection. When the projector jammed, she forced it open. The light that came out wasn't from any bulb I'd ever seen. His voice faltered, grief cutting through the static. We all looked at it. We shouldn't have. The hallway shuddered. Flames rippled backward, sucking into the cracks as if the motel were inhaling. Laura reached room 9. The key in her pocket vibrated, searing through the fabric. She drew it out. The metal glowed dull red. For an instant she saw her reflection on its surface. Not burned, not exhausted, but younger, sitting behind a desk piled with missing person reports, promising herself she'd solve one more case before retirement. The image mouthed words she couldn't hear. Inside room 9, the light pulsed brighter. The fire stopped entirely, froze in midair. Tongues of flame hung motionless, each curl of smoke a sculpture. Laura pushed the door open and stepped through. The room was empty except for an old 16mm projector set on a table. The film ran through it endlessly, though the reel never depleted. On the wall opposite, the image of a desert highway flickered. Her SUV parked on the shoulder, her own figure walking toward a sign that read Black Hollow Motel. The film looped again and again, her motion jerky, puppet-like. Every repetition, her outline grew dimmer, while the shadow walking behind her became clearer. Carl stood in the doorway, watching. "That's the first frame," he said softly. The motel was supposed to die that night. The projector should have melted, but she wanted permanence. You can't give permanence to time without paying a price. Laura stepped closer to projection. The surface of the wall rippled, as though it were liquid. "If I destroy it," she asked. "You erase the reel," Carl answered. "But you erase yourself with it. You're on it now." Her stomach twisted. "Then tell me how to stop it without dying." Carl almost smiled. "No one has ever tried." Before she could respond, the film stuttered. The sound of the reel filled the room. Click, click, click. The projected image zoomed suddenly, no longer showing a highway but the motel burning. The very scene she stood in, recreated within its own frame. Flames reignited around her, rushing outward from the screen. Carl vanished in the glare. She raised her arms to shield her face, expecting heat, but the fire was cold, a bright wind pulling rather than pushing. Her feet left the ground. The last thing she saw before being swallowed was a film reel slowing, the last frame frozen on her own open eyes. When the light faded, she stood in darkness again, the sound of rain replacing fire. She was outside, though not the desert she knew. A city skyline glowed faintly in the distance, Los Angeles, maybe decades younger. Neon reflected in puddles around her boots. The sign of a motel across the street blinked lazily. Black Hollow Motor INN. Grand opening 1958. Laura's breath caught. The air smelled new. Somewhere inside that pristine building, she could already hear a projector starting to roll. Rain sheeted down across the newborn highway, soft and steady, turning the world silver. The sign above the new building glowed proudly, Black Hollow Motor INN, vacancy. Its neon flicker steady, uncorrupted. Laura stood across the road, drenched, staring to the curtain of rain. It was all here. The fresh paint, the still warm concrete, the smell of ozone and possibility. Yet every instinct screamed that she was walking backward to the same nightmare, watching the birth of a place that would one day consume her. She crossed the street. Each footstep felt heavier than the last, the ground sucking faintly at her soles. Through the glass door she could see people laughing, shaking hands, checking in. Among them, young Carl Hutchins, alive, whole, stood behind the counter, proudly giving a key to a couple she recognized from the missing persons files. Tom and Evelyn Moore. Evelyn held a camera, the old wind-up 16mm she'd seen in the basement reels. She turned suddenly, and for an instant her gaze locked on Laura through the window, eyes sharp and curious, as though she could see through time itself. Then she smiled, lifted the camera, and filmed. Laura felt the pull, that invisible magnetic thread between the lens and its subject, the moment the reel began to record her. She stepped inside, drenched, breath shallow. "You can't stay here," she said to no one and everyone. "You can't film this." Carl blinked. "Ma'am, are you all right?" "I'm trying to stop it," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she meant the camera, the motel, or herself. Evelyn lowered the viewfinder, confusion on her face. "Stop what?" "The loop," Laura said. "You started it. The light you opened, it's alive. It's feeding on every second you capture." Something in Evelyn's expression faltered, recognition or fear. She looked down at the camera, then back up, "But I haven't filmed anything yet." The air changed. The rain outside froze mid-fall, each droplet hanging motionless. The walls darkened. The brand-new furniture cracked, aged and rotted before their eyes. The fluorescent bulbs dimmed to the same sickly yellow she remembered. Carl stumbled backward, staring as his skin blackened, his body aging decades in seconds. Evelyn screamed and dropped the camera. The reel spun free, unspooling across the floor like a slick black serpent. Laura reached down, grabbed into the film, and saw images flashing across it faster than thought. Every face, every guest, every night since the motel's opening, all trapped inside that single length of celluloid. The whispers rose around her, desperate and pleading, the voices of the guests begging not to be forgotten. She looked at Carl, half ash, half shadow, who managed one last rasp plea. And the real detective. Laura struck a match. The flame hissed in the frozen air, but held. She touched it to the film. Fire raced along the black strip, devouring images at impossible speed. The walls ignited, but the fire was silent, bright white instead of red. Evelyn tried to snatch the camera back, but Laura shoved her toward the door. "Run. Never look back." The light spread, filling the room until every object became silhouette, then outline, then nothing. Laura stood in the center, arms raised, feeling the fire pass through her rather than burn. One heartbeat, then another, and she whispered into brightness, "No more guests." When she opened her eyes again, she was sitting in her SUV on a sun-bleached road. The desert stretched unbroken to the horizon. In her rear-view mirror, the landscape was empty. No motel, no sign, no trace of pavement disturbed. Only sand and the distant shimmer of heat. Her phone buzzed once. A new message from unknown. "It remembers you, but only you." She exhaled slowly. That's enough. She dropped the phone on the seat, started the engine, and drove until the road curved out of sight. The desert wind erased her tire tracks behind her, grain by grain, until the place where Black Hollow had stood was nothing but silence. And somewhere deep beneath the sand, a single frame of unburned film fluttered, catching a ray of sunlight before the wind buried it forever, showing a woman walking away from a motel that no longer existed. Then the image faded, and the reel finally stopped turning.